The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the park as I rounded the corner of my usual running path. The late afternoon sky was a masterpiece of oranges and purples, painting the clouds with hues that made every evening run feel like a small slice of heaven. I loved this time of day. The park, almost magical in the twilight, was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the grind of everyday life and clear my head. Tonight, however, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, but a creeping unease settled in the pit of my stomach. As I picked up the pace, my gaze shifted to the park's sprawling greenery, illuminated by the last rays of sunlight. The park was unusually quiet, a stark contrast to its typical bustle of evening walkers and joggers. The silence was punctuated only by the soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Then I saw him. At first, he was just a dark figure on a bench beneath a cluster of trees. I barely noticed him as I approached, but something about the way he sat there, motionless, made my skin crawl. As I drew closer, the figure became clearer. An adult man dressed in a full clown costume, complete with a garish red nose and a painted, unnerving smile. His eyes, obscured by the mask, were fixed directly on me. A shiver ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a Halloween prank or some eccentric who liked to dress up, but the feeling of dread only intensified. I quickened my pace, focusing on putting as much distance between myself and the unsettling figure as possible. My breathing grew rapid, and my heart pounded louder with each step. I stole one last glance over my shoulder. The clown hadn't moved, but somehow I felt an invisible weight pressing down on me. The park, once a haven, now felt like a trap closing in. My pulse quickened as I continued to sprint along the path, trying hard to shake the disquieting image of the clown from my mind. The park, which usually offered me a sense of peace and tranquility, now seemed ominously empty. The shadows lengthened as the sun sank lower, and the warm hues of sunset gradually faded into a deepening twilight. I kept my eyes straight ahead, not daring to glance back again. My legs felt like lead, each stride demanding more effort than the last. The park's familiar trees and benches blurred by in my peripheral vision, but all I could focus on was the growing anxiety that clawed at my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I fought to maintain a steady rhythm, knowing that the faster I ran, the sooner I'd be out of this nightmare. As I rounded a bend, I couldn't help but steal another quick glance over my shoulder. My heart nearly stopped. The clown was no longer seated on the bench. Instead, he was now standing up, and it looked like he was moving in my direction. His slow, deliberate steps were almost more terrifying than if he had been running. He wasn't just observing me now. He was following me. A surge of adrenaline pushed me to run faster, my feet pounding against the gravel path. I could hear the faint, echoing sound of footsteps behind me, keeping time with my frantic pace. My mind raced. Was he getting closer? What did he want from me? The realization that I might be in serious danger set my nerves on edge. I could barely focus on where I was going as my anxiety sharpened. My only thought was to reach the safety of the park's exit, where the streetlights would cast a more reassuring glow. Desperation fueled my flight, and I pushed myself harder, feeling like I was running on pure fear. I had to get out of there, and fast. With every pounding step, the park seemed to stretch farther away, and the darkness closed in around me. My chest burned and my lungs felt like they were on fire, but there was no room for slowing down. I pushed through the pain, my thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and panic. The image of the clown, his unsettling, painted smile and unblinking eyes, haunted me. As I turned a corner, I could see the faint glow of streetlights up ahead, marking the boundary of the park and the start of the more populated streets. The sight of them was both a beacon of hope and a cruel reminder of how far I still had to go. My pace quickened as I pushed myself harder, focusing on the promise of safety just beyond the park's edge. But then I heard it, an unmistakable sound that sent icy dread down my spine, the echo of footsteps. It wasn't just my own rapid breathing and pounding feet. Someone else was running behind me, matching my speed with eerie precision. My heart raced even faster. I didn't need to look back to know who it was. The clown was still there, still pursuing me. My mind scrambled for a plan, but all I could think about was getting to my apartment as quickly as possible. I fumbled for my phone, still clasped in my hand from when I'd first called Jessica. My fingers shook uncontrollably as I dialed her number, the screen illuminated by the harsh light of the call button. "Jessica, it's me!" I shouted into the phone as soon as she answered. "You have to call the police. There's a man dressed like a clown. He's following me. I think he's trying to hurt me." I could hear Jessica's voice on the other end, laced with concern and confusion, but I had no time to explain further. I focused on the park's exit, nearly blinded by tears of fear and relief as I saw the street ahead. Just a little farther, I kept telling myself. The streetlights were so close. The moment I burst through the park's exit and onto the street, relief was almost palpable. The streetlights, harsh and glaring, felt like a shield against the encroaching darkness. I slowed down just enough to glance back, but I couldn't see the clown anymore. The shadows swallowed him up, leaving only the lingering dread. My apartment building was a block away, and I forced myself to maintain a steady pace as I made my way towards it. The familiar sight of the building's facade was a small comfort, and I prayed that I'd make it there before he could catch up. My fingers clutched the phone tightly, still pressed to my ear as I heard Jessica's frantic voice on the other end. "Please, just hang in there," she urged, her voice strained with worry. "I'm calling the police right now. Just get to your apartment and lock the door." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I reached the entrance to my building and quickly swiped my keycard, fumbling with the lock as my anxiety spiked. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The sound was both reassuring and disorienting, a reminder that help was on the way but that I was still vulnerable. Once inside, I bolted the door behind me, the heavy click of the lock echoing through the small lobby. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I glanced around, half expecting to see the clown lurking in the hallway. I took deep, shuddering breaths as I waited for the police to arrive. Minutes felt like hours. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What if he had followed me? What if he was still out there, waiting? I paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Finally, I heard the faintest knock on the door. I rushed to open it, only to be greeted by 2 officers in uniform, their faces set in concerned but professional expressions. "Are you okay?" one of them asked as they stepped inside, their presence bringing a semblance of calm to the storm of fear inside me. As the officers began their routine questions and assessments, I struggled to steady my racing thoughts. The police station had called in more units to cover the park and its surrounding areas, but I knew that finding the clown would be a challenge. The reality of the situation hit me. He could have vanished by now, blending into the night with no trace. I recounted every detail of the encounter to the officers, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor that laced my words. "He was just sitting there on a bench, dressed like a clown," I explained. "When I saw him, he was just watching me, and then he got up and started following me." One of the officers, a tall man with a kind face named Officer Collins, nodded sympathetically. "We'll have officers check the park and nearby areas. Can you give us a description of what he was wearing and any distinguishing features?" I took a deep breath and detailed the costume as best as I could. Bright red hair, a white face with exaggerated features, and a red nose. "He had these creepy eyes that seemed to follow me no matter where I went," I added, feeling a shiver as the memory resurfaced. While Collins took notes, his partner, Officer Ramirez, made a few calls over the radio, coordinating with other patrols. I watched the street below from my window, hoping to see any sign of the police search, but the night remained eerily still. After what felt like an eternity, the officers finished their investigation and turned to me. "We'll be in touch if we find anything," Collins said. "In the meantime, try to stay safe and let us know if you see anything unusual." I thanked them, though my gratitude was overshadowed by the unease that still gripped me. As they left, I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, feeling the weight of the evening's events press down on me. Jessica had arrived while the officers were here, and she sat on the couch, looking as shaken as I felt. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "We'll get through this," she said softly, her voice reassuring but tinged with her own fear. "You're safe now." I nodded, though my mind was still racing. The clown might have vanished for now, but the fear he instilled would linger long after the night had passed. The following day, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the park remained an ominous specter in my mind. I hadn't slept well, and every creak of the apartment building seemed magnified. I'd barely managed to eat breakfast when my phone rang. It was Jessica, her voice tinged with worry. "Hey, did you hear?" she asked, her tone anxious. "There's been another report of someone in a clown costume causing trouble. The police think it might be connected to what happened to you." A chill ran down my spine. I'd hoped, naively perhaps, that the incident was an isolated case, but it seemed like my worst fears were coming true. I quickly got dressed and decided to head to the park. Maybe seeing it in the daylight would help me regain some control over my life. Jessica insisted on coming with me, and we met at the park's entrance. The sun was shining brightly, a stark contrast to the eerie gloom of the previous evening. Children played nearby, their laughter and shouts filling the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that clung to me like a second skin. As we walked along the path where I had first encountered the clown, I kept my gaze sharp, searching for any sign of unusual activity. The park was still beautiful in the daylight, with blooming flowers and well-manicured lawns, but my sense of tranquility was gone. Instead, every rustling leaf and distant sound set me on edge. We spotted a small group of people gathered near one of the park's benches. As we approached, I overheard snippets of their conversation, more reports of a clown causing disturbances, unsettling encounters similar to mine. The realization that others had experienced the same terror I had made my stomach churn. Jessica and I spoke with some of the people in the group. Most were shaken, but had little additional information. One woman mentioned seeing the clown near the same part of the park, but hadn't been able to get a good look at him. The officers who had responded to the previous day's incident were also on patrol, and we briefly spoke with them. They assured us they were doing everything they could to catch the individual responsible. Despite their reassurances, the shadow of fear remained, hanging over the park like a dark cloud. As we left, I glanced back at the park, its serene facade belying the underlying danger. The sense of safety I had once associated with this place was gone, replaced by an unshakable anxiety that I knew would take time to overcome. We walked in silence as the park receded behind us, the vibrant sunlight now feeling almost too bright, too stark. Jessica tried to make small talk, but her attempts to lighten the mood felt hollow against the weight of our shared unease. I appreciated her presence more than I could say, but the sense of dread I felt was too overpowering to ignore. As we approached the local cafe, a popular spot for morning coffee and casual chats, I hoped a change of scenery would help clear my mind. The cafe was bustling with its usual morning crowd. The barista, a friendly woman named Linda, greeted us with a warm smile as we entered. Jessica and I ordered our usual drinks, coffee for me and tea for her, and settled into a corner booth. The cafe's cozy ambience, with its soft lighting and cheerful decor, was a stark contrast to the lingering tension of the park. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. The aroma of fresh coffee and the gentle hum of conversation created a comforting cocoon. We discussed our next steps over our drinks, trying to piece together any additional information that might help us understand what was happening. Jessica suggested we try talking to more people in the neighborhood, especially those who might have been out and about in the park during the evening. "Maybe someone saw something that didn't get reported," she said, her tone hopeful. Just then, the cafe door swung open and a man walked in, his appearance catching my eye. He was wearing a faded red baseball cap and an old worn jacket. He moved with a kind of shuffling gait that seemed oddly familiar. I glanced at Jessica, who was already looking in the same direction. "Isn't that Jake?" she asked, her voice low. Jake was someone we'd heard about in the local news, a guy known for his eccentric behavior and sometimes unsettling presence around town. The same Jake who'd been mentioned in connection with the clown sightings. We watched as Jake ordered his coffee and took a seat at a table near the window. I felt a pang of unease. Was it just a coincidence, or was there a connection between him and the clown? As we finished our drinks, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake's presence was more than just a random occurrence. Jessica and I exchanged worried glances. If Jake was indeed involved, we needed to be cautious. Our investigation into the park's strange events was far from over, and the shadow of uncertainty loomed larger than ever. The sight of Jake in the cafe stirred a mix of curiosity and apprehension in me. I couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was more than just a coincidence. Jessica and I finished our coffees in tense silence. and I found myself glancing over to where Jake sat, absorbed in his own world. The sense of unease grew stronger as I noticed the way he occasionally looked around, as if he was expecting something or someone. After leaving the cafe, Jessica and I decided to walk back toward the park, hoping to gather more information from anyone who might have been out and about. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and the park, though still serene, felt different in the daylight. The incidents of the previous evening seemed to cast a long shadow over the familiar surroundings. We approached a few joggers and dog walkers, asking if they'd seen anything unusual lately. Most were friendly, but offered little more than a shrug and a polite, "No, sorry." The park had been quiet, they said. However, one elderly man feeding the ducks at the pond seemed to know something more. "I did see someone out of place last week," he said slowly, his voice gravelly with age. "A guy dressed up in a clown costume, just hanging around near the playground. Didn't think much of it at the time." Jessica and I exchanged glances. The elderly man's account matched the pattern we were starting to piece together. The clown sightings seemed to be spreading, but there were still too many unanswered questions. As we continued our walk, I couldn't shake the thought of Jake. Was he somehow involved? My mind raced with possibilities. Could he be the person behind the clown mask, or was he just another oddball with no connection to the recent events? We decided to head back to the cafe, hoping to catch Jake as he left. As we approached, I noticed him sitting at the table, looking more agitated than before. He kept glancing nervously at the door and shifting in his seat. Jessica and I took a deep breath and approached him. "Hi, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mind if we join you for a moment?" Jake looked up, his eyes darting between us. "Sure," he said, though his tone was guarded. As we sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something crucial, or perhaps even dangerous. Jake's reaction to our approach was immediate. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around the cafe as though searching for an escape route. Jessica and I sat down across from him, trying to project calm and friendliness despite the anxiety buzzing between us. "Thanks for letting us join you," I began, forcing a smile. "We've been hearing a lot about these clown sightings around the park. We just wanted to talk to people who might have seen something or know anything about it." Jake's fingers fidgeted with his coffee cup, and he avoided making eye contact. "I don't really know much," he muttered. "Just saw some weird stuff, you know? People in costumes, and that's it." Jessica leaned forward slightly. "We heard that someone matching your description was seen around the park. You've been around there recently, haven't you?" Jake's face paled, and he shifted uneasily. "I go to the park sometimes. It's a place to clear my head, you know, but I haven't seen anything unusual." He tried to sound casual, but his nervousness was palpable. I pressed on gently. "We're not accusing you of anything, Jake. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. If you've seen anything, or if you know anyone who's been acting strangely, it could really help us understand this situation better." Jake's eyes finally met mine, and there was something unreadable in his gaze. He sighed deeply and looked down at his cup. "Look, I know what you're thinking, but it's not me. I wear a mask sometimes, but not like that. I'm just a little messed up, all right? I don't want any trouble." Jessica and I exchanged glances. Jake seemed genuinely distressed, but his evasiveness left us with more questions than answers. "All right, Jake," I said softly. "If you remember anything or if you see anything strange, please let us know. It's important." Jake nodded, his expression a mix of relief and fear. "Sure, I will." As we left the cafe, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake's discomfort had revealed something important. He was hiding something, though whether it was related to the clown sightings or just his own personal struggles, I couldn't yet tell. Jessica and I walked away with a sense of unease, the mystery deepening with each new clue. The hunt for answers was far from over, and the park's shadows seemed darker than ever. Jessica and I left the cafe feeling more unsettled than before. Jake's reaction had been a strange mix of defensiveness and vulnerability. His discomfort, while potentially revealing, had also raised more questions about his true involvement or knowledge. We decided to walk around the neighborhood, hoping to clear our heads and maybe stumble upon a clue or two. The sun was beginning to set again, casting long shadows across the streets. I couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu, as if the day's events were mirroring the previous night. The sense of normalcy was hard to grasp. The neighborhood felt oddly quiet, almost as though it was holding its breath. As we walked, we discussed our next steps. "We need to dig deeper," Jessica said, her tone resolute. "If Jake's not the clown, then who is? And why is he so anxious?" I nodded in agreement. "Maybe we should check with some of the locals who frequent the park or nearby areas. There's got to be someone who's seen something or knows something." Our conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion ahead. A group of teenagers laughing and shouting was gathered around something at the park's edge. As we approached, I saw that they were clustered around a discarded box. One of the teens was holding a flashlight, illuminating the contents with exaggerated curiosity. Jessica and I moved closer, trying to catch a glimpse. The box appeared to be filled with various items: clown masks, fake red noses, and costumes. It looked like a collection of Halloween paraphernalia, but it was unsettling to see it all together, especially in the context of the recent events. A woman nearby, who had been watching the scene with an anxious expression, approached us. "I saw someone dump that box here earlier today," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't think much of it until I heard about the clown sightings." I took a deep breath, trying to process this new piece of the puzzle. The box seemed to confirm that whoever was behind the clown sightings was deliberately orchestrating something. The items inside could be a clue, or perhaps part of a broader scheme to create fear and confusion. As we left the park, Jessica and I felt a renewed sense of determination. The clown's identity and motives were still shrouded in mystery, but we now had tangible evidence to investigate further. The shadows of the park seemed darker than ever, but we were more committed than ever to uncovering the truth behind the mask. The days that followed felt like a blur of anxiety and uncertainty. Every time I passed the park, I couldn't help but glance nervously at the benches and shadows, half expecting to see the clown lurking just out of sight. The feeling of being watched was constant, even within the confines of my apartment. Jessica and I spent the next few days trying to gather more information. We reached out to neighbors and local businesses, hoping someone might have noticed something unusual. Our efforts yielded little more than vague sightings and the same anxious reactions we'd encountered before. It seemed as though the community was as unsettled as we were, but no one had concrete information. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from Officer Collins. His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "We need to meet," he said. "We found something that might be connected to the recent incidents." I arranged to meet him at the police station that afternoon. My heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread as I entered the building. Officer Collins met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. He looked serious as he took a seat across from me. "We've been investigating the clown sightings and have managed to identify a few leads," Collins began. "One of them led us to a storage unit rented under a false name. Inside, we found several costumes and masks, but there was something else, notes and journals that detail the clown's activities." He handed me a folder containing copies of the documents they had found. The notes were disjointed, filled with cryptic references and unsettling observations about the park and its visitors. There were sketches of different clown outfits and bizarre plans that seemed to outline various pranks or disruptions. Collins leaned forward, his expression grave. "We're still piecing together the full picture, but these documents suggest that there might be multiple people involved. They seem to be working together to create fear and chaos." The realization hit me like a cold wave. The clown wasn't just one person, but possibly a group, working in unison to instill fear. My mind raced with questions. Who were these people? What was their endgame? And how far were they willing to go? As I left the station, clutching the folder tightly, I knew that the investigation had taken a darker turn. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the full picture was far from clear. The sense of dread that had been lingering was now tinged with a new, more pressing fear, one that promised even more danger ahead. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and anxiety. The discovery of the clown's notes and journals had sent our investigation into overdrive. Jessica and I spent countless hours poring over the documents, trying to decode the cryptic references and make sense of the disturbing plans detailed within. One evening, we decided to meet at my apartment to go through the folder again. Jessica arrived with a determined expression, clutching a cup of coffee to keep her energy up. The sky outside was a deepening shade of twilight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We spread the documents out on my dining table, the the pages littered with unsettling sketches and disjointed notes. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing to a particular page. It had a series of scribbled dates and locations, along with cryptic phrases like "final act" and "grand reveal." I leaned in, trying to piece together the fragments of the plan. "It seems like there's a timeline here. They might be planning something big soon. But what?" We followed the dates and locations mentioned in the notes, cross-referencing them with our own observations and reports. One location, marked prominently with a red circle, was the old carnival grounds on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for years, a place we hadn't considered as a focal point in our investigation. Jessica looked up from the documents. "This carnival ground, could it be where they're planning their final act? It's isolated and fits the description of the kind of place they'd use." The thought of an abandoned carnival being the site of whatever they had planned sent a shiver down my spine. "It's worth checking out," I agreed, "but we should be careful. If there are multiple people involved, we don't know what we're walking into." We decided to visit the carnival grounds the next day, planning to scout the area and see if there were any signs of recent activity. The anticipation was nerve-wracking, but it was clear that this was a crucial step in understanding the full extent of the clown's scheme. As Jessica and I prepared for the investigation, I felt a mix of dread and determination. The notes had revealed that the situation was more complex and dangerous than we had initially thought. We were closing in on the truth, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The carnival might hold the answers we needed, or it could be a trap set by those who thrived on fear. The next morning, the sky was overcast, with dark clouds hanging low, as if reflecting the gravity of our mission. Jessica and I geared up for our trip to the old carnival grounds, both of us feeling a mix of apprehension and resolve. The abandoned site was on the edge of town, a place most people avoided due to its dilapidated condition and rumors of it being haunted. We arrived at the carnival grounds just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The place was eerily quiet, with only the sound of our footsteps breaking the stillness. The carnival was a shadow of its former self, with rusted rides and overgrown weeds reclaiming the area. Despite the dilapidation, there was something unsettling about the emptiness. As we moved deeper into the grounds, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The remnants of the carnival, broken down Ferris wheels, crumbling booths, and faded signage, were a stark reminder of how time had left this place behind. We approached the central area where the notes had indicated there might be significant activity. Jessica scanned the area with a flashlight, her face set in concentration. "Look over there," she whispered, pointing to a large, dilapidated tent in the distance. It was partially obscured by overgrown vegetation, but seemed to be in better condition than the rest of the carnival. We made our way cautiously toward the tent, the rain now falling steadily. As we approached, I noticed that the ground around the tent had been recently disturbed, as if someone had been moving things around. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Inside the tent, the smell of dampness and mildew was overpowering. We used our flashlights to illuminate the space, revealing a scene that sent chills through me. Various clown costumes and masks were scattered around, along with tools and materials for making them. There were also stacks of handwritten notes and sketches pinned to a large board, documenting what looked like a series of planned events and gatherings. Jessica's flashlight fell on one of the notes pinned to the board. It read, "The grand finale tonight." The ominous message sent a wave of urgency through me. It was clear that whatever the clowns had planned was set to happen that very night. As we prepared to leave and report our findings, a sense of dread settled over us. The carnival grounds were no longer just a place of past memories, but a site where the clowns' plans were about to come to a head. We needed to act quickly to prevent whatever was coming, but we also had to be cautious not to walk into a trap. The hunt for answers had led us to a critical juncture, and the stakes had never been higher. The drive back from the carnival grounds was tense, with the rhythmic patter of rain against the windshield amplifying the silence in the car. Jessica and I exchanged worried glances, our minds racing with the implications of what we'd discovered. The note about the grand finale happening that night was a stark reminder of how close we were to something dangerous. Once we arrived at my apartment, we immediately called Officer Collins to report our findings. His voice was grave as he listened to our account. "We need to get a team out there right away," he said. "I'll arrange for additional units to meet us at the carnival grounds." Jessica and I prepared for the worst, grabbing our rain jackets and flashlights before heading back out. The rain had intensified, turning the streets into slick, reflective surfaces that made driving even more hazardous. Our thoughts were consumed by the anticipation of what we might find when we returned to the carnival. As we pulled up to the carnival grounds, the police were already on the scene, their flashlights cutting through the darkness and rain. Officer Collins greeted us, his expression serious. "We're going to sweep the area and secure the tent. Stay close and let's see what we can uncover." We followed the officers into the tent, the atmosphere heavy with tension. The scene inside was just as we had left it, but now there were more eyes examining the area. The officers began collecting evidence and taking detailed notes, their movements methodical and precise. One of the officers found a large duffel bag hidden behind some crates. Opening it revealed more clown costumes and masks, along with a set of walkie-talkies. The discovery confirmed our fears. The clowns had planned a coordinated effort, and their activities extended beyond what we had initially realized. As the officers continued their investigation, Collins pulled Jessica and me aside. "This is more serious than we thought," he said. "The masks and communication equipment suggest a larger network. We'll need to dig deeper into the people connected with this." The realization that the clown's scheme involved more than just one person was unsettling. The sense of urgency was palpable, and the rain seemed to echo the rising stakes. We had uncovered a significant part of the plan, but the true extent of the threat remained unclear. As we stood in the dim light of the carnival tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was far from over and that the worst was yet to come. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as we waited for the police to complete their investigation at the carnival grounds. Jessica and I stood under the flickering light of a nearby street lamp, drenched but resolute. The atmosphere was thick with anxiety, and every distant sound felt amplified in the quiet of the rain-soaked night. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Collins approached us, his face lined with concern. "We've found some interesting leads," he said, glancing back at the officers who were still busy cataloguing evidence. "The equipment and costumes suggest a well-organized group. We're going to increase our patrols around the area and see if we can catch them before they can act on their plans." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and worry. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rain. Collins looked at us seriously. "You've done well by uncovering this. It's best if you stay out of the immediate area for your safety. We'll keep you updated on any developments." With that, Jessica and I reluctantly agreed to head back to my apartment. As we drove away from the carnival grounds, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still off. The grand finale they had mentioned was clearly more than just a simple prank. It was a significant event, and the stakes were high. Back at my place, we dried off and made ourselves some coffee, trying to calm our nerves. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the coffee maker and the occasional rumble of thunder outside. I stared at the stack of notes and sketches we had brought back from the carnival, the sinister nature of the plans evident in every scribbled line. Jessica broke the silence, her tone thoughtful. "We should consider the possibility that the grand finale might not just be a big event. It could be a diversion. What if the real plan is something more insidious?" Her words struck a chord. I'd been so focused on the immediate threat that I hadn't fully considered the potential for a hidden agenda. We needed to think critically and anticipate their next moves. As we reviewed the documents again, trying to piece together any further clues, the weight of the situation settled heavily on us. The night was far from over, and the carnival was just one part of a much larger puzzle. The real challenge was yet to come, and we had to be prepared for whatever the clowns had in store. The next morning dawned cold and grey, the overcast sky matching the somber mood that had settled over me. Jessica and I had barely slept, our minds racing with thoughts of the night's events and what might lie ahead. The police had promised to keep us informed, but the uncertainty of their investigation left us anxious. Over breakfast, we discussed our plan of action. "We need to stay proactive," Jessica said, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue. "The police are doing their part, but we can't afford to just wait around. We should see if there's any more information we can gather or people we can talk to." I agreed, knowing that sitting idly was not an option, We decided to start by revisiting the park, hoping to find any overlooked clues or witness new developments. As we arrived at the park, it was quieter than usual, the morning fog giving the scene a ghostly appearance. The park, once a place of leisure, now felt like a backdrop for something much darker. We approached some of the locals who frequented the park, including the elderly man who had previously mentioned seeing someone out of place. He was there, feeding the ducks as usual. His face lit up with recognition when he saw us. "Have you noticed anything different recently?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The man frowned thoughtfully. "Well, now that you mention it, there's been a lot more activity at the old carousel lately. It's been out of use for years, but I've seen lights and heard noises coming from that area." Jessica and I exchanged glances. The carousel was not far from the playground where the clown had been seen. "Do you know what kind of activity?" Jessica asked. The man shook his head. "Not exactly, just that it's been more active than usual. People seem to be hanging around there more often." The new lead was intriguing. We decided to investigate the carousel, hoping it might provide more answers. As we made our way toward it, a sense of urgency quickened our steps. The carousel, hidden behind overgrown shrubs, looked even more derelict in the daylight. But the idea of someone using it for secret meetings or preparations made my skin crawl. We approached cautiously, the rain from the previous night having left everything slick and slippery. I could feel my heartbeat quickening as we neared the carousel, knowing that whatever we found there could be crucial to unraveling the clown's plans. The carousel loomed ahead, an eerie silhouette against the grey morning sky. Its once vibrant paint was now peeling, and the metal horses were rusted and unmoving, casting long, distorted shadows across the ground. Jessica and I approached cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the damp grass. As we got closer, we noticed something unsettling: faint tire tracks leading up to the base of the carousel. The sight made my stomach tighten. It suggested recent activity, perhaps even someone actively using the area for something sinister. Jessica and I exchanged determined glances before moving to the carousel's entrance. The gate, once adorned with bright colors, was now crooked and barely hanging on its hinges. We pushed it open slowly, wincing as the rusted hinges squeaked loudly. Inside, the carousel was even more foreboding. The structure was cluttered with debris, broken branches, discarded soda cans, and old newspapers. Despite the disarray, there was an unmistakable sense that someone had been here recently. Jessica's flashlight beam swept across the area, revealing something hidden beneath a pile of old tarps. With a quick glance at each other, we moved to investigate. I pulled back the tarps to reveal a series of large wooden crates, stacked haphazardly. Each crate was labeled with cryptic symbols and numbers that seemed to correspond to the notes we had seen earlier. "What do you think is inside?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. We pried open one of the crates, revealing its contents. More clown costumes and masks, neatly folded and packed. Alongside them were several new-looking electronic devices, walkie-talkies, small cameras, and what appeared to be a homemade surveillance system. The sight confirmed our fears. The carousel was being used as a base for the clown's operations. A sound behind us made us freeze. It was a low, shuffling noise, followed by a soft thud. Jessica's flashlight swung toward the source of the sound, but the beam only revealed shadows and old carnival equipment. We both tensed, realizing we might not be alone. "We need to get out of here," I said urgently. "If they're using this place, they might be nearby." Jessica nodded, and we quickly began to gather evidence. As we made our way back to the park entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of uncovering something much larger and more dangerous than we had initially realized. The carousel was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a crucial piece of the puzzle that could lead us to the heart of the clown's plans. The sense of urgency drove us back to my apartment, where we quickly laid out the evidence we'd collected from the carousel. The rain had stopped, but the grey skies and dampness seemed to reflect our grim mood. Jessica and I were on edge, both eager and apprehensive about what we might find in the remaining items. As we examined the electronic devices, I noticed a small notebook wedged between some costumes. It was filled with handwritten notes and sketches, much like the ones we had seen at the carnival. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, revealing a detailed plan for an event labeled The Final Showdown. Jessica leaned in, her flashlight casting a harsh light on the pages. "This looks like a detailed schedule," she said, pointing to a series of dates and locations, including one that stood out, City Hall, tonight. The mention of City Hall made my heart race. The thought of an event happening at such a prominent location was alarming. I quickly scanned the notebook for more details and found a map of the city with several locations marked, including City Hall, the park, and other public spaces. Each location had annotations that suggested various surprise activities and gatherings. "This could be their main event," I said, my voice tight with anxiety. "If they're planning something at City Hall, it's likely going to be something big. We need to inform the police immediately." Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone and dialing Collins's number. As she spoke with him, I gathered the rest of the evidence, including the walkie-talkies and surveillance equipment. We needed to ensure the police had everything they needed to prevent whatever was planned for tonight. Collins arrived at my apartment within the hour, his face a mask of professional concern. We handed over the evidence and briefed him on our findings. "This notebook suggests they're planning a major disruption at City Hall," Collins said, flipping through the pages. "We'll need to alert security and coordinate with additional units to secure the area." As Collins and his team left to enact the emergency plan, Jessica and I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The evidence was pointing to a major event, but what exactly were they planning? And would we be able to stop it in time? The minutes ticked by slowly as we waited for updates. The stakes were higher than ever, and our sense of urgency was palpable. City Hall was about to become the stage for the climax of the clown's scheme, and we had to hope that the police could intervene before it was too late. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, Jessica and I were on edge, anxiously awaiting any updates from the police. The evidence we'd provided had set a flurry of activity in motion, and now it was a waiting game to see if the authorities could thwart the clown's plans. We decided to head to City Hall ourselves, hoping to gather more information and possibly spot any suspicious activity before the police could act. The building, normally a hub of civic activity, looked foreboding in the twilight, its stone facade and large columns casting an almost intimidating shadow. Jessica and I approached cautiously, our footsteps echoing on the steps. We kept to the perimeter, watching for anything unusual. The area around City Hall was surprisingly quiet, with few people out and about. The streets were bathed in an orange glow from the streetlights, creating a stark contrast to the growing darkness. As we circled the building, Jessica's eyes caught movement near the side entrance. A figure, dressed in a dark coat and hat, was loitering by the door, occasionally glancing around as if waiting for someone. My heart skipped a beat. It could be one of the clowns or someone connected to their operation. We moved closer, trying to stay out of sight. From our vantage point, we could hear snippets of conversation between the figure and another person who emerged from the shadows. Their discussion was low and urgent, but we could make out a few key words. "The package is ready, and make sure it goes off without a hitch." Jessica and I exchanged worried glances. It sounded like they were talking about some kind of device or contraband, and the urgency in their voices suggested it was something significant. We decided to call Collins and let him know what we had overheard. Jessica quickly dialed his number and relayed the information. "We've got someone here who's talking about a package and a device. They're acting suspiciously near the side entrance of City Hall." Collins's response was immediate. "We're on our way. Keep an eye on them and stay hidden. Don't engage." We moved to a concealed spot behind some nearby shrubs, our hearts pounding as we waited. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. The stakes were high and the tension was almost unbearable. The arrival of the police seemed like the only chance to prevent whatever disruption the clowns had planned. We could only hope that our tip would be enough to stop them in time. The tension was palpable as Jessica and I crouched behind the shrubs, our eyes locked on the side entrance of City Hall. The minutes dragged by slowly, and every distant sound seemed amplified, heightening our anxiety. We could hear the muffled voices of the two figures near the entrance, their conversation now largely indistinguishable over the roar of our racing hearts. Finally, the distant sound of sirens broke through the quiet, signaling the arrival of the police. Relief washed over me, but the situation was still far from resolved. We watched as several patrol cars pulled up, their lights flashing intermittently in the encroaching darkness. Officer Collins and a team of officers moved swiftly and silently toward the side entrance. They were clad in tactical gear, their movements precise and practiced. Jessica and I remained hidden, our breaths held in anticipation. The officers approached the entrance with caution. One of them, using a hand signal, signaled to the others to spread out and cover all possible escape routes. Collins, leading the team, carefully opened the door and slipped inside. We could barely see what was happening, but the muffled sounds of conversation turned to hurried footsteps and a low, intense dialogue. After what felt like an eternity, Collins emerged from the building, his face grim but relieved. He waved us over, signaling that it was safe to come forward. We stepped out from our hiding place, our legs feeling weak with the adrenaline that had been coursing through us. "You did well," Collins said, his voice carrying a note of approval. We found a suspicious package near the side entrance, along with several individuals who were planning to disrupt the event tonight. They've been detained and the package is being inspected. Jessica and I exchanged a look of cautious relief. "What was in the package?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Collins sighed. It was a homemade device rigged to cause a lot of damage if it had been detonated. It seems like they were planning to create chaos right before the event. The gravity of the situation sank in. We had averted a major disaster, but the close call was a stark reminder of how dangerous this whole ordeal had been. The police continued their sweep of the area, ensuring that there were no other threats. As Jessica and I watched, the weight of the past few days finally began to lift. We had been part of something much bigger than we initially realized, and while the immediate threat was neutralized, the sense of unease remained. Tonight had been a victory, but it was clear that the clown's plans had far-reaching implications that we still needed to understand. The aftermath of the disrupted attack left the city on edge, but the immediate crisis had been averted. Jessica and I had barely managed to get any rest. Our minds were still racing with the details of the night's events and the looming question of why the clowns had targeted City Hall. The next morning, the sun was bright, casting a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped us. As we sipped our coffee, we discussed the situation. "We've made progress, but we still need to understand the full scope of their plan," Jessica said, her voice laden with determination. I nodded, staring at the notes and sketches we had collected. "We've seen the surface of their operation, but there's got to be more to it. We need to find out who's behind all this and why City Hall was the target." Our first step was to follow up on the arrests made the previous night. The individuals detained were known associates of the local clown troupe, but they had been tight-lipped during their questioning. We needed more insight, so we decided to visit the local precinct where they were being held. When we arrived at the precinct, we were met by Collins, who greeted us with a weary but relieved expression. "We've got a lot of leads, but nothing concrete from the suspects yet. They're not giving up much." Jessica and I spent the next few hours going through the details of the case with Collins. We learned that the suspects were part of a group known for their bizarre behavior and penchant for staging elaborate, often unsettling performances. They had a history of disturbing the peace, but nothing on this scale. Collins provided us with access to the suspects' backgrounds and any known associates. As we reviewed the files, it became clear that the clowns were more than just an oddity. They were organized and had a larger agenda. "We need to dig into their connections," Jessica said, pointing to a list of names and addresses linked to the suspects. "There's got to be someone who can give us more information." We agreed, knowing that finding the root of this disturbing network was crucial. The investigation was far from over, and the pieces of the puzzle were still scattered. As we left the precinct, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the brink of uncovering something far more sinister. The day was grey and drizzly as Jessica and I pored over the files and connections related to the suspects. Our goal was to identify any links that could lead us to the mastermind behind the clown's plans. The more we dug, the more it became evident that we were dealing with something far more complex than a mere prank. We decided to start by visiting one of the addresses listed in the suspects' files, a rundown warehouse on the edge of town. It had been flagged as a location of interest due to its frequent use by the clowns for their performances and gatherings. The building was a dilapidated shell, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows boarded up. As we approached, the warehouse loomed large, casting an imposing shadow over the dreary street. The area was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional clatter of debris. We checked the address and then looked at each other. This was definitely the place where we might uncover more about their operations. Jessica knocked on the door, and we waited in silence. After a few moments, we heard shuffling from inside, followed by a cautious voice. "Who's there?" "We're investigating some recent events," I called back, trying to sound authoritative but friendly. "We'd like to ask a few questions." There was a pause before the door creaked open just a crack. A young man peered out, his face partially obscured by a hood. "What kind of questions?" "We're looking into the clown troupe and their activities," Jessica explained. "We've got reason to believe there's more going on than just a few pranks." The young man hesitated before stepping aside to let us in. The interior of the warehouse was a cluttered mess of old furniture, discarded costumes, and strange equipment. The smell of mildew and dust was overpowering, and the dim light from a single hanging bulb did little to dispel the gloom. As we made our way inside, the young man introduced himself as Sam, a low-level member of the troupe. He was nervous, but seemed willing to talk. "I don't know much, but I've heard talk about a big plan involving some high-profile events," he said, wringing his hands. "They're trying to make a statement, but I don't know the details." Jessica and I exchanged glances. The mention of high-profile events and a statement was unsettling. We needed to dig deeper. "Do you know who's behind it or where they might be planning this?" I pressed. Sam shook his head. "I don't know names, but they're meeting tonight. I think it's at an old theater downtown. That's all I know, I swear." Jessica and I left the warehouse with a new lead, feeling a mix of frustration and hope. The theater was our next stop, and it seemed like the key to understanding the clown's full agenda. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but we still had a long way to go. The old theater was a relic from a bygone era, its faded marquee and crumbling facade a testament to the passage of time. Jessica and I arrived just as dusk was beginning to envelop the city. The theater stood at the end of a deserted street, its imposing structure casting long shadows over the pavement. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Jessica asked, peering at the building with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I'm sure," I replied, glancing at the address Sam had given us. "He said they're meeting here tonight. If we want to get to the bottom of this is where we need to be." We approached the theater cautiously, our steps echoing in the stillness. The front entrance was chained shut, but the side door was slightly ajar. We slipped inside, taking care not to make any noise. The interior of the theater was dark and musty. The once grand auditorium was now a shadowy expanse of dusty seats and a tattered stage curtain. We moved quietly through the rows, our footsteps barely audible on the threadbare carpet. We found a vantage point behind the stage, where we could observe the auditorium without being easily seen. As we settled into position, we noticed a small group of people gathered near the stage, their faces obscured by dim lighting and shadows. Among them were several individuals we recognized from the clown troupe. "They're definitely planning something," Jessica whispered, her eyes scanning the group. "Look at the way they're setting things up." I nodded, noting the various items being arranged, props, large boxes, and what appeared to be an elaborate setup for a performance. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of anticipation, and the air was thick with the smell of paint and old theater dust. One of the individuals, a tall man wearing a colorful suit and a creepy mask, took center stage. He began to address the group, his voice low but fervent. "Tonight is our chance to make a statement. Everything has to be perfect." Jessica and I exchanged worried glances. It was clear that the clowns were not just staging a performance, but preparing for something far more significant. We needed to find out what their plan was, and quickly. As the meeting continued, we remained hidden, our minds racing with possibilities. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking. We had to find a way to alert the authorities and prevent whatever spectacle they were planning. The theater might have been a grand stage in its day, but tonight it was about to host something far more sinister. The air inside the old theater grew thick with tension as the meeting progressed. Jessica and I remained hidden in the shadows, our hearts pounding as we listened to the clowns discuss their plans. The tall man in the colorful suit, now addressing the group with an air of authority, was clearly the mastermind behind their operation. "We've got everything in place," he said, his voice reverberating through the dimly lit space. Tonight's performance will be our grandest yet. It's time to make a statement that the city will never forget." The other clowns murmured in agreement, their voices a mix of excitement and nervous energy. I caught snippets of their conversation, mentions of timing, coordination, and a final act that would shock everyone. The details were still vague, but it was evident that they were planning something catastrophic. Jessica nudged me, her face set in a determined expression. "We need to get closer. We can't let them go through with this." I nodded in agreement. We carefully maneuvered our way through the darkened theater, avoiding creaky floorboards and stray pieces of debris. Our goal was to get closer to the center of the action and gather more information. As we approached the edge of the stage, we could hear the tall man discussing the specifics of their plan with a few key individuals. "Make sure the devices are set up and hidden," he instructed. "The fireworks will provide the perfect distraction. When the crowd is at its peak, that's when we make our move." My stomach churned at the mention of devices and fireworks. It was clear now that their plan was not just a performance, but a calculated attempt to create chaos and terror. The use of fireworks as a distraction suggested that the clowns had something more dangerous planned, perhaps explosive devices or other harmful contraptions. Jessica's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at it and then at me, her eyes wide with concern. "Collins wants an update. We need to let him know what's happening here." We quickly sent a detailed message to Collins, describing the setup and the timing of the plan. As we waited for his response, we stayed as concealed as possible, our nerves on edge. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. Tonight's event at the theater was shaping up to be a significant threat, and we had to act swiftly to prevent disaster. The minutes ticked away as Jessica and I remained hidden, our anxiety growing with every passing second. The clowns continued their preparations, setting up their devices and discussing their plan with increasing enthusiasm. The tall man in the colorful suit seemed to be the ringleader, orchestrating the chaos with precise instructions. I glanced at Jessica, who was clutching her phone tightly. Collins had responded quickly, acknowledging our update and assuring us that additional units were en route. We needed to buy time and gather more evidence while we waited for the authorities to arrive. The theater's dim lighting flickered as the clowns worked, casting eerie shadows across the stage. I noticed one of the clowns, an older man with a wild beard, wheeling out a large cart covered with a cloth. The cart's contents were still obscured, but it was clear that they were critical to their plan. Jessica pulled out her phone and took a few discreet photos of the setup. "We need to document this," she whispered. "If the authorities can't get here in time, this might be our only proof of what's going on." Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of footsteps. A group of clowns, dressed in more elaborate costumes, entered the theater. They were carrying large boxes and seemed to be in high spirits, chatting animatedly about the show and its impact. Their conversation was filled with euphoric anticipation, and it was clear that they saw this as the climax of their twisted performance. As the crowd of clowns gathered, I noticed a side door leading to the backstage area. If we could make our way there, we might find more information about the final preparations or even locate any potential explosives. "Let's check out that door," I suggested to Jessica. "It might lead us to something important." We moved stealthily toward the side door, our breaths coming in quiet puffs. The door creaked slightly as we opened it, revealing a narrow hallway cluttered with more props and equipment. We continued down the hallway, our hearts pounding, until we reached a locked room. The sound of clowns' voices grew faint as we approached. Jessica pulled out a small tool from her bag and managed to pick the lock. The door swung open to reveal a small storage area filled with various devices, including several suspicious-looking containers. Before we could investigate further, we heard a commotion from the main auditorium. It seemed like the clowns were getting ready to start their performance. We had to move quickly. Our job now was to secure this evidence and ensure that the police arrived in time to prevent whatever horrifying spectacle was about to unfold. The backstage area of the old theater was a chaotic mix of props, old costumes, and scattered equipment. Jessica and I stood in the dim light, our breaths coming in shallow gasps as we surveyed the suspicious-looking containers we had just discovered. The clowns' earlier preparations had left an unsettling sense of urgency hanging in the air, and time was running out. "This is definitely not just a performance," Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper. These containers look like they could hold something dangerous. I nodded, glancing around the small storage room. The containers were marked with faded symbols and warning labels, their contents hidden beneath layers of tape and grime. I carefully pried open one of the containers, revealing a tangle of wires and what appeared to be explosive devices. My stomach churned at the sight. "We need to get this evidence to Collins and the police," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If these are what I think they are, they could cause a lot of damage." Jessica pulled out her phone and quickly sent a message to Collins, detailing what we had found. We knew the police would need to see this evidence immediately, but we also had to be cautious about how we moved it. The clowns' preparations were reaching their peak, and we had to act fast to prevent any potential disaster. As we were about to leave the storage room, we heard footsteps approaching. We exchanged panicked glances and quickly hid behind a stack of old props. The door creaked open, and a couple of clowns walked in, discussing last-minute details about their performance. "I can't believe it's finally happening tonight," one clown said, adjusting his mask. "This is going to be epic." The other clown nodded, holding up a small device. "We need to make sure the crowd is distracted at the right moment. Everything has to go off as planned." Jessica and I waited in tense silence as they left, their conversation confirming our fears. We had to find a way to get this information to the authorities without alerting the clowns to our presence. We carefully gathered the most critical evidence, our movements as quiet as possible. With the evidence secured, we slipped out of the storage room and made our way back to the side door, ready to meet the police and ensure that the clowns' dangerous plans were halted before it was too late. With the evidence in hand, Jessica and I made our way back through the darkened theater, our nerves taut as a bowstring. The clock was ticking, and every second we spent in the theater increased the risk of being discovered. We reached the side door, only to find that it had been closed and secured from the outside. A surge of panic hit me. We needed to get out, but the clowns were probably on high alert by now. Jessica looked around frantically. "We need another exit. There must be another way out." I scanned the dimly lit hallway and noticed a narrow, flickering light coming from the end. It led to an emergency exit sign. "That way," I said, pointing towards the light. "Let's move." We hurried down the hallway, our footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. As we approached the emergency exit, I glanced back, half expecting to see the clowns closing in on us. Fortunately, we reached the exit without incident. I pushed open the door, which led us to a small alley behind the theater. The alley was damp and littered with trash, but it offered us a brief respite. We took a deep breath, trying to steady our racing hearts. Jessica quickly called Collins again to update him on our location and the evidence we had. "Collins, we've secured the evidence and are outside now," she said, her voice taut with urgency. "We're at the alley behind the theater. The clowns are getting ready for their act. You need to get here fast." Collins's response was immediate. "We're on our way. Stay put and keep a low profile. We don't want to spook them before we're ready." We waited in the alley, our anxiety growing with each passing minute. The sounds from the theater, distant music, laughter, and muffled voices only served to heighten our sense of dread. The thought of what could happen if the clowns went through with their plans was almost too much to bear. Finally, the sound of sirens approached, growing louder and more distinct. Relief washed over us as we saw the police cars turn into the alley. Collins and several officers jumped out, their expressions grim but determined. "There's no time to lose," Collins said, surveying the scene. "Show us where the devices are, and we'll handle it from here." With the police now in control, Jessica and I handed over the evidence and provided a quick briefing on what we'd seen. As the officers moved swiftly toward the theater, we stepped back, watching as they prepared to confront the clowns and dismantle their plans. The sense of impending disaster was still palpable, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope that the danger would be neutralized before it could unfold. As the police swarmed the old theater, Jessica and I stood in the dim light of the alley, watching with a mix of relief and anxiety. The urgency of the situation had not lessened. We knew that even with the authorities on site, the clown's plan could still go horribly wrong if not handled swiftly. Collins and his team moved with practiced efficiency. They quickly secured the perimeter and began searching the theater, their radios crackling with updates as they communicated with each other. The sound of their movements, Footsteps, hushed voices, and the occasional command filled the night, creating a tense atmosphere that made it hard to relax. "Do you think they'll find everything in time?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I hope so," I replied, trying to stay calm. "They've got a lot of experience with these kinds of situations, but we need to stay vigilant. The clowns are probably still inside, and they might be getting desperate." As we watched, Collins approached us, his face set in a determined expression. "We've got teams searching the entire building," he said. "The evidence you provided was crucial. We've identified several explosive devices and a number of incendiary materials. We've also found evidence of a plan to set off fireworks as a distraction." Jessica and I exchanged a worried glance. "Is there any word on how much time we have?" Jessica asked, her voice edged with concern. Collins nodded. "We're doing everything we can to defuse the situation. The theater is being evacuated, and the bomb squad is handling the devices. We've also increased patrols around the area to ensure no further incidents occur." The tension began to ease slightly, but the gravity of the situation was still heavy on our shoulders. We knew that the clown's plan was designed to create maximum chaos and terror. The fact that we had managed to prevent a potential disaster did little to diminish the unsettling feeling that lingered. "Thank you for your help," Collins said, his tone sincere. "You've done more than just report suspicious activity. You've potentially saved lives." Jessica and I nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We just did what needed to be done," I said, "but we still need to understand why they targeted City Hall and what their ultimate goal was." Collins agreed. "We'll continue the investigation and keep you updated. For now, get some rest. You both deserve it." As Collins returned to coordinate with his team, Jessica and I took a moment to reflect. The night had been a whirlwind of fear and action, but we had managed to play a crucial role in averting a major catastrophe. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, we had succeeded in stopping a terrible plan from coming to fruition. The chaotic energy of the theater scene gradually gave way to a somber calm as the night wore on. With the clowns apprehended and the explosive devices diffused, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Jessica and I stood by the perimeter, our clothes smeared with dust and grime from our earlier encounter. The adrenaline was fading, leaving us exhausted but relieved. Collins approached us, his expression a mixture of weariness and gratitude. The evacuation went smoothly. No one was hurt and the devices were successfully disarmed. We'll need to conduct further interviews with the clowns to piece together their motives. "That's a relief," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "Do you have any idea why they targeted City Hall and what their ultimate goal was?" Collins shook his head. "We're still piecing that together. The clowns have been notoriously tight-lipped, but we're hoping to get some answers soon. For now, it seems their plan was to create maximum chaos and make a statement. We've seen evidence that they wanted to draw attention and cause fear, but the specifics of their message are still unclear." Jessica sighed, looking around at the aftermath. "I just hope this is the end of it. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this story." Collins nodded in agreement. "We'll keep you updated as we learn more. You two have done an incredible job tonight. Without your help, this could have turned out much worse." We thanked Collins and made our way back to our car, the night air crisp against our faces. The city was quiet now, its earlier tension replaced by a calm that felt almost eerie. Despite the resolution of the immediate crisis, the sense of unease lingered. As we drove home, Jessica and I discussed what had happened. "We were lucky to get out of there in one piece," she said, glancing at me. "But there's still so much we don't know." "I know," I replied. "I think we've only scratched the surface. There's a bigger picture here that we need to understand." When we finally reached home, the exhaustion hit us hard. We sank into our respective beds, hoping for rest, but knowing that the events of the night would linger in our minds. Tomorrow, we would need to follow up on the investigation and see where it led. But for now, we took solace in the fact that we had prevented a disaster and helped to bring a dangerous situation under control. The morning after the theater incident, the city was abuzz with news about the thwarted attack. Headlines splashed across newspapers and news websites, detailing the dramatic events and the quick response of the police. Jessica and I had barely gotten any sleep, and the weight of the previous night's events was heavy on our shoulders. We needed to follow up on our findings and understand the full scope of the clown's plan. We met up at a local cafe, the comforting aroma of coffee doing little to dispel our lingering unease. Jessica was scrolling through her phone, scanning the news updates and trying to piece together any new information. "Look at this," she said, handing me her phone. "They're saying the clowns had a manifesto. Apparently it was found among their belongings, and it outlines their grievances and demands." I read the article with growing concern. The manifesto was apparently a list of political and social grievances expressed in a series of disjointed and angry rants. It was clear that the clowns had been using their performances as a platform for their ideology, but the exact nature of their demands was still unclear. "We need to get our hands on that manifesto," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "It might give us insight into their motivations and any other plans they might have." Jessica agreed. "We should contact Collins and see if we can access the manifesto or any other related documents. It's important to understand the full picture." We reached out to Collins, who was still working on the case. He agreed to meet us at the police station to brief us on the latest developments. When we arrived, Collins greeted us with a tired but relieved smile. "Good to see you both," he said. "We've got the manifesto, and it's quite a read. It's clear that these clowns were planning more than just a one-off event. They had a broader agenda." Collins handed us a copy of the manifesto. It was filled with erratic and extremist statements, but one thing was evident. The clowns had been preparing for something significant, and their attack on the theater was just a part of a larger scheme. "This is just the beginning," Collins warned. "We'll need to stay vigilant and see where this leads. You've been instrumental in stopping their immediate plans, but there might be more to uncover." As Jessica and I left the police station, the weight of our responsibility settled heavily on us. We had a new lead and a deeper understanding of the clowns' motives. The night had revealed the surface of their plot, but the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. We were committed to seeing this through, knowing that the stakes were higher than ever. The city woke to a tense atmosphere, still reeling from the previous night's events. Jessica and I had barely caught any rest, and our minds were already churning with questions about the clowns' manifesto and their broader agenda. We decided to start our day by reviewing the manifesto in detail. We hoped it would provide crucial insights into their motivations and potential next moves. We convened at my apartment, spreading the manifesto across the dining table. It was a chaotic jumble of angry rhetoric, punctuated by erratic phrases and scribbled notes. It was clear the authors had a deeply unsettling worldview, but deciphering their exact plans was a challenge. "I'm not sure where to start," Jessica said, her brow furrowed as she scanned the document. "This manifesto is like a tangled web of grievances." I nodded, feeling the same frustration. "Let's look for any recurring themes or specific references. There might be clues about their next targets or methods." We pored over the manifesto for hours, noting down recurring themes. The document was filled with references to revolution and awakening, with frequent mentions of political and social upheaval. They seemed to see their actions as a catalyst for a larger change, but their language was so cryptic that it was hard to pin down exact intentions. One phrase stood out. "The city's false tranquility must be shattered to reveal the truth." It seemed to hint at a deeper, more systematic plan to disrupt the city's peace. Our analysis suggested that their actions were not random, but part of a larger, coordinated effort to incite chaos. Jessica looked up from the manifesto, her face pale. "This doesn't sound like a one-off act. It's like they're setting the stage for something bigger." "Exactly," I replied, feeling a chill run down my spine. "We need to figure out what their next move is and how we can stop it before it escalates." With a sense of urgency, we decided to reach out to Collins. We needed to share our findings and get his help in tracking any new developments. As we prepared to leave, the weight of the manifesto's ominous message felt heavy on our shoulders. The city's tranquility was hanging by a thread, and we had to act quickly to prevent further disaster. The drive to the police station was tense, our minds racing with the implications of the manifesto. Jessica and I were both on edge, the urgency of our task weighing heavily on us. The city felt unusually quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what might come next. When we arrived at the station, Collins was waiting for us in his office. The room was cluttered with files and maps, a testament to the ongoing investigation. He greeted us with a weary nod and gestured for us to sit. "I've been reviewing the manifesto," Collins said. his voice steady but tired. "It's clear that these clowns were more organized than we initially thought. We need to figure out their next move and fast." We shared our observations, focusing on the recurring themes of revolution and upheaval. Collins listened intently, taking notes and nodding occasionally. The phrase, "The city's false tranquility must be shattered to reveal the truth," stood out to us, I said. "It seems like a call for something more extensive. We need to identify what they might be planning next." Collins's expression darkened as he processed the information. "We've been monitoring various threats and leads, but this gives us a new perspective. If they're aiming for a larger-scale disruption, it could involve multiple locations or coordinated attacks." He picked up a map of the city and spread it out on the desk. "Let's look at potential targets. Based on the manifesto's themes, they might be interested in locations symbolizing stability or authority, places like government buildings, major public spaces, or critical infrastructure." Jessica pointed to several locations on the map. "What about the upcoming city anniversary event? It's a high-profile occasion, and it might fit their agenda perfectly." Collins nodded thoughtfully. "That's a strong possibility. We'll need to increase security at the event and notify all relevant departments. Meanwhile, let's continue to analyze any patterns in their communications and movements." As we wrapped up the meeting, Collins promised to keep us updated and asked us to remain vigilant. The weight of our responsibility was evident in his demeanor, and we knew the stakes had risen dramatically. Jessica and I left the station with a renewed sense of urgency. The city anniversary event was just days away, and the clowns' potential plans loomed ominously. We had to act quickly to protect the city and prevent their twisted vision from becoming a reality. The city's anniversary event was drawing near, and preparations were in full swing. The streets were adorned with banners and festive decorations, and a palpable sense of excitement filled the air. However, beneath the surface of celebration, an undercurrent of tension lingered. The threat posed by the clowns had cast a shadow over what was meant to be a joyous occasion. Jessica and I were now working closely with Collins and his team, coordinating efforts to secure the event. The police had implemented stringent security measures, and patrols were increased around key locations. Despite the heightened security, the threat of an attack remained a constant worry. We arrived at the central command center set up for the event, a makeshift hub in a nearby building. Collins was already there, poring over security feeds and briefing his team. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of purpose and urgency. "Glad you're here," Collins said as we entered. "We're going over every detail to make sure nothing slips through the cracks. We've set up checkpoints and increased surveillance, but we need to stay alert for any suspicious activity." Jessica and I joined the team, reviewing the security protocols and discussing possible scenarios. We paid particular attention to the high-profile areas, the main stage, VIP areas, and public gathering spots. Every entrance and exit had been mapped out, and additional security personnel were stationed at strategic points. "Do we have any leads on the clowns' whereabouts or any potential plans?" I asked Collins, trying to stay focused despite the growing tension. "Nothing concrete yet," Collins replied. "We're monitoring communications and keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. It's possible they're lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike." As the day of the event approached, Jessica and I made rounds through the security zones, checking in with officers and ensuring everything was in place. The festive atmosphere outside was a stark contrast to the intense focus inside the command center. That evening, as the city prepared for the anniversary celebrations, we stood on the outskirts of the event area, our eyes scanning the crowd and the perimeter. The clowns' plan was still a looming threat, but the city's defenses were now fortified, and we were ready to respond if necessary. The night was a delicate balance between vigilance and celebration. We hoped that our preparations would be enough to thwart any potential threats and allow the city to enjoy its anniversary without fear. The anniversary event had begun in full swing, with the city's streets buzzing with excitement and festivity. Lights twinkled, music played, and people gathered in anticipation. Jessica and I, still on high alert, moved through the crowd, our eyes constantly scanning for any signs of trouble. The police had established a strong presence and additional security measures were in place, but the threat of the clowns still loomed over us. We took a brief respite in a quieter section of the event area where a large tent had been set up for VIP guests and performers. From this vantage point, we could see the entire layout of the event and keep an eye on all major entrances and exits. Collins had given us a detailed briefing, and we were determined to ensure that nothing went awry. As we observed the festivities, I noticed a figure lingering near one of the side entrances. The person was dressed in casual clothing, but there was something off about their demeanor. They seemed overly cautious, frequently looking around as if checking for something or someone. "Do you see that?" I asked Jessica, pointing discreetly towards the figure. Jessica followed my gaze and nodded. "Yes, that person's behavior is suspicious. Let's report it to the security team." We approached a nearby officer and relayed our concerns. The officer immediately took note and contacted the control center. Within minutes, a few plainclothes officers were dispatched to investigate the individual. While we waited for an update, we continued our patrol, our senses heightened. The clowns had a penchant for dramatic flair and disruption, so any unusual activity had to be taken seriously. We couldn't afford to let our guard down. Soon, the officer we had alerted returned with news. "The individual you reported was carrying a concealed bag with several items that raised suspicion. We've detained them for questioning and are searching their belongings." A wave of relief washed over me, but the night was far from over. We had managed to avert a potential threat, but the risk of further incidents remained. As the event continued, we stayed vigilant, ready to act if necessary. The city's anniversary was meant to be a time of celebration, but tonight, our focus was on ensuring that the festivities proceeded without incident. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute bringing us closer to the end of the event. With each passing moment, we hoped that our efforts would be enough to keep the city safe and ensure that the clowns' plans remained thwarted. As the anniversary event drew to a close, the atmosphere in the city began to shift. The once vibrant celebration had gradually settled into a quieter, more reflective tone. People were beginning to head home, their excitement replaced by a sense of relief and satisfaction. Jessica and I, though exhausted, remained on high alert, determined to ensure the night ended without incident. The security team had managed to handle the suspicious individual we had reported earlier. The person in question was indeed carrying a bag with items that could have posed a risk, including a small amount of fireworks and a makeshift incendiary device. After thorough questioning, it became clear that the individual had acted alone and had no direct connection to the clowns. Still, the situation had highlighted the necessity of remaining vigilant. We stood near the Central Command Center, where Collins was coordinating the final security sweep. The evening's tension had eased somewhat, but the sense of relief was tempered by the awareness that the threat was still not entirely over. "Everything's under control for now," Collins said as he approached us. "The security team has cleared the area, and we've had no other incidents tonight. The clown's plan didn't come to fruition, thanks to your quick thinking and the coordination of everyone involved." Jessica and I exchanged a tired but satisfied glance. "That's good to hear," I said, "but I'm still concerned. We know they had a broader agenda, and this night might have just been a distraction or a test." Collins nodded. "You're right. We'll continue to investigate and track any leads. The city's security will remain heightened until we're certain the threat is fully contained." As the last of the guests departed and the cleanup began, Jessica and I took a moment to reflect. The night had been a whirlwind of activity, and the threat had been real. But we had managed to prevent disaster. The city had been able to celebrate its anniversary safely, and that was a victory in itself. Despite our exhaustion, we knew that the work wasn't over. The clowns' plans were still a mystery, and we had to remain vigilant. But for tonight, at least, we could take a moment to appreciate that we had succeeded in keeping the city safe and allowing the anniversary to go off without a hitch. As we walked away from the event, the city's lights twinkling in the distance, we felt a cautious optimism. The immediate danger had passed, but the road ahead remained uncertain. We were ready to face whatever came next, knowing that our efforts had made a significant difference. The aftermath of the anniversary event left the city feeling both triumphant and uneasy. Though the celebration had proceeded without major incident, the unsettling knowledge that the clown's larger plan was still unknown hung over us like a dark cloud. Jessica and I had returned to our usual routine, but the gravity of the situation demanded continued vigilance. The next morning, we convened at a local coffee shop, a quiet place where we could discuss our next steps away from prying eyes. The cafe was bustling with the usual morning crowd, but the clamor of conversation and clinking cups did little to drown out the tension we felt. "I'm relieved the event went off without a hitch," Jessica said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But it's clear that we haven't seen the last of these clowns. Their manifesto suggested a bigger plan." I nodded, reviewing my notes from the previous night. "Exactly. We've managed to thwart one of their attempts, but we need to dig deeper. There must be more clues or connections that we've missed." Jessica glanced around the cafe, then leaned in. "What if we look into any recent interactions or contacts the clowns might have had? There could be a network or a larger group involved. We should reach out to Collins and see if he has any new information or leads." We made the call to Collins, and he agreed to meet us at the police station. When we arrived, he greeted us with a weary but determined look. "Thanks for coming. I've been going through the clowns' records and interviewing their associates. We've found a few leads that might be worth exploring." Collins led us to a conference room filled with documents and digital files. "We've identified several individuals who were in contact with the clowns and have been linked to similar radical groups. We're also tracking down a possible funding source that might explain how they financed their activities." Jessica and I pored over the information, feeling a renewed sense of urgency. The clowns' network was more extensive than we had anticipated, and their plans were more deeply entrenched in the city's fabric than we had realized. As we analyzed the new leads, it became clear that our task was far from over. The clowns had not only staged a dramatic spectacle, but had woven their influence into the city's underbelly. We had to uncover their full network and prevent any future threats. The stakes had risen, and our commitment to seeing this through was stronger than ever. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the city, but the aftermath of the anniversary event left a lingering chill. Jessica and I had spent the night poring over documents and leads, determined to piece together the clown's broader scheme. With Collins's new information in hand, we were ready to dive deeper into the investigation. We started our day by examining the list of individuals connected to the clowns. Each name on the list had been linked to various radical groups and fringe organizations. The clowns' network was more complex than we had initially thought, and it was clear that their reach extended beyond the city's borders. Jessica and I decided to focus on one of the individuals who had surfaced repeatedly in our research, David Reynolds, a local businessman with ties to several controversial causes. According to Collins's reports, Reynolds had been seen at multiple gatherings where the clowns were present. His financial records also showed large, unexplained donations to organizations linked to the clowns. We arranged to meet Reynolds at his upscale office downtown. The sleek, modern building seemed at odds with the dark undertones of our investigation. As we approached his office, a sense of unease settled over us. We were about to confront someone who might hold crucial information about the clowns' operations. Reynolds greeted us with a polite but guarded demeanor. "Miss Parker, Miss Adams," he said with a forced smile. "What can I do for you today?" We introduced ourselves and explained our concerns about his connections to the clowns. Reynolds's expression shifted from polite curiosity to one of carefully masked discomfort. "I assure you, I have no involvement in any of their activities," Reynolds said smoothly. "My charitable contributions are well within legal bounds and are intended to support various community projects." Jessica and I exchanged a skeptical glance. "We've seen records of your donations and your attendance at certain events," Jessica said. "These connections are hard to ignore." Reynolds's composure faltered slightly. "I'm afraid I can't provide much more information. If you have specific concerns, you should contact my legal team." Despite Reynolds's evasive responses, we left his office with more questions than answers. It was clear that he was hiding something, and his connections to the clowns were too significant to ignore. We had to dig deeper and explore other avenues to uncover the full extent of the clowns' network and their ultimate goal. The investigation had become more intricate, and the stakes were higher than ever. David Reynolds' stonewalling only fueled our determination to uncover the truth. We left his office with a sense of frustration, knowing he was hiding something crucial. Back at the station, Collins met us with a thoughtful look, clearly still mulling over our conversation with Reynolds. "I didn't expect Reynolds to be so uncooperative," Collins admitted as we reviewed our notes. "But his evasiveness could mean he's hiding something significant. We need to dig further into his connections and financial activities." We agreed. The clues from Reynolds had pointed us towards an underground network of radical groups, and it was time to trace the financial trail more thoroughly. Our next step was to examine the organizations receiving donations from Reynolds and other linked entities. Jessica and I spent the next few hours analyzing financial records, searching for patterns and anomalies. We discovered that several of Reynolds' donations were funneled through shell companies and seemingly legitimate charities with suspiciously vague missions. These organizations, while appearing innocuous on the surface, had connections to radical groups and political extremists. One charity, in particular, stood out: the City Heritage Fund. It had received large sums from Reynolds and was connected to a series of controversial figures. The fund's mission was to support local cultural initiatives, but its leadership and financial transactions suggested a more sinister agenda. "We need to investigate this City Heritage Fund more closely," I said, pointing to the documents spread out before us. "It seems like a front for something much darker." Jessica nodded, her eyes focused on the computer screen. "Agreed. Let's find out who's behind the fund and what they're really up to. We should also see if there are any upcoming events or meetings linked to it." Collins agreed to put a team on tracing the City Heritage Fund's activities and connections. Meanwhile, Jessica and I planned to follow up with a contact who had been involved with the fund's community outreach programs. If there were hidden agendas or secret meetings, we hoped this contact could shed light on them. As we prepared for our next steps, a sense of urgency settled over us. The clowns' network was proving to be a tangled web, and unraveling it required persistence and precision. We were inching closer to the heart of their operations, and every piece of information brought us one step nearer to understanding their ultimate plan. The investigation was far from over, but we were determined to see it through to the end. The days following our investigation into the City Heritage Fund were a whirlwind of activity. Jessica and I dove headfirst into uncovering more about the fund's true purpose. Our efforts were met with mixed results, but one lead stood out: a clandestine meeting scheduled for the upcoming weekend, hosted by one of the fund's prominent board members. Collins's team had managed to confirm the meeting's location and time, a private estate in the outskirts of town. It was an exclusive venue that catered to high-profile events, making it a fitting choice for covert gatherings. We were determined to attend and gather as much information as possible. On the day of the meeting, we took every precaution to blend in. Dressed in semi-formal attire, we approached the estate with a blend of anticipation and caution. The property was surrounded by tall iron gates and heavily patrolled by private security. Our entry was facilitated by the pretense of being part of the event staff, thanks to a fake invitation we'd managed to obtain. Once inside, we navigated the opulent surroundings with practiced ease. The estate's grandeur was impressive, but it was the guest list and the conversations we overheard that held the most value. We noticed several high-profile figures mingling, including key players from the City Heritage Fund and individuals linked to the clowns. In one corner of the Grand Hall, a group of people was engaged in a heated discussion. Their conversation was punctuated by phrases like "final preparations" and "execution phase." It was clear they were planning something significant, but the specifics remained elusive. Jessica and I maneuvered closer, carefully listening in. One man, whom we recognized as a known associate of Reynolds, was outlining a plan that involved strategic locations and timing for maximum impact. Before we could gather more details, an unexpected disruption occurred. An alarm went off, signaling a breach in security. It was clear that someone else had discovered our presence. Jessica and I made a swift exit, blending back into the crowd as we headed for the nearest exit. Back at the station, we relayed our findings to Collins. The details of the conversation confirmed our fears. The clowns were planning a coordinated strike, targeting key locations throughout the city. We had to act fast to prevent their plans from coming to fruition. The urgency of the situation was undeniable. The city was once again on the brink of chaos, and it was up to us to stop it. The urgency of the situation hit us hard as we left the estate. Jessica and I raced back to the station where Collins and his team were waiting. Our findings from the covert meeting had painted a grim picture. The clowns were plotting a series of synchronized attacks across the city. It was clear that they intended to create widespread chaos and disruption. Collins met us with a look of concern as we debriefed him. "What did you learn?" he asked, his tone serious. "The clowns are planning multiple attacks," I said. recounting the details we overheard. They're targeting key locations simultaneously. It's going to be a massive, coordinated strike. Collins nodded, his expression tightening. We need to mobilize all available resources immediately. We'll have to inform the city's emergency services and coordinate a response to prevent these attacks. Jessica and I joined Collins in a flurry of activity. We drafted an emergency alert to be sent out to local law enforcement, emergency responders, and key city officials. The message outlined the threat and provided instructions for heightened vigilance and rapid response. Meanwhile, Collins's team worked on pinpointing the locations mentioned in the meeting. We discovered that the targets were not only high-profile public areas, but also critical infrastructure sites, transport hubs, utility plants, and emergency services buildings. The clowns were aiming to cripple the city's ability to respond effectively. We need to prioritize these locations and deploy teams to secure them, Collins instructed. Let's set up a command center at the city's emergency operations center. We'll have to coordinate the response and keep communication lines open. Jessica and I headed to the emergency operations center, where the atmosphere was tense but focused. Teams of officers and emergency responders were being briefed and deployed to the identified locations. The sense of urgency was palpable as we worked to ensure that every possible precaution was taken. As the hours ticked by, we remained in constant communication with the field teams, monitoring the situation and making adjustments as needed. The city's defenses were mobilized and the response teams were in position. We hoped that our swift actions would be enough to thwart the clowns' plans. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, there was a sense of determination among everyone involved. We had been through a lot to get to this point, and we were prepared to see this through to the end. The city's safety depended on our ability to act decisively and protect against the impending threat. The sun had barely risen when the city's emergency response teams began their coordinated efforts. Jessica and I were on the ground at the command center, working with Collins and his team to oversee the operation. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on us. The clowns' planned attacks were imminent, and we needed to be prepared for anything. The Emergency Operations Center buzzed with activity. Monitors displayed live feeds from security cameras, maps marked with high-priority locations, and real-time updates from field units. The air was thick with tension as everyone worked diligently to ensure the city's safety. Collins approached us with a grim look. "We've deployed teams to all the key locations identified," he said. "I need you two to oversee the security of the major transportation hubs. They're high-priority targets and require immediate attention." Jessica and I nodded, grabbing our gear and heading to the nearest transportation hub. The area was already swarming with police officers and security personnel, all focused on securing the perimeter and checking for any suspicious activity. The usually bustling hub was eerily quiet, its usual hum replaced by an undercurrent of anxious energy. We began our sweep of the facility, conducting thorough inspections and speaking with security personnel. Every corner was scrutinized, every bag and package inspected. We worked methodically, trying to remain vigilant despite the mounting stress. At one point, Jessica noticed a man loitering near an unattended luggage cart. He was dressed casually but seemed out of place in the tense environment. We approached him with caution, our instincts alert. "Excuse me, sir," I said, flashing my badge. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" The man looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. I'm just waiting for someone," he stammered. I didn't realize there was so much security. Jessica exchanged a wary glance with me. "We're conducting security checks. Can you please step over here while we inspect your belongings?" The man reluctantly complied, and as we searched his bag, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. It contained several items that could be used to create a makeshift explosive. We immediately called for backup and began questioning him further. As we awaited additional support, Jessica and I remained on high alert, knowing that every second counted. The clown's plan was coming to fruition, and our efforts to stop them were crucial. The tension in the air was palpable as we prepared for the next phase of our response. The city's safety was on the line, and we were determined to prevent any disaster from unfolding. As the day wore on, the urgency of our mission at the transportation hub intensified. The discovery of potential explosives in the man's bag had heightened our alert levels. Jessica and I, along with the bomb squad, meticulously secured the area and began a thorough investigation of the suspicious items. The bomb squad worked with practiced precision, carefully examining the contents of the man's bag. They confirmed that the materials were indeed capable of creating a dangerous device. With the area evacuated and cordoned off, we waited anxiously as the team disarmed and safely removed the potential threat. While the bomb squad did their work, Jessica and I continued to question the man. He was cooperative but clearly frightened. "I was just trying to get by," he repeated. "I didn't know what was in the bag. It wasn't supposed to be there." His claims of ignorance were dubious, but the more we probed, the more his story seemed to unravel. He eventually admitted that he had been approached by someone he didn't know, who had asked him to transport the bag without asking questions. It was a clear sign of the clowns' manipulation and their strategy of using unsuspecting individuals to carry out their plans. "Do you know who gave you the bag?" Jessica asked, her voice steady despite the tension. "No," the man replied, shaking his head. "I only saw a briefcase with a clown logo. The person didn't say much. They just handed me the bag and walked away." The clue about the briefcase with the clown logo was significant. It tied into our broader investigation into the clown's network. We needed to track down this briefcase and its owner to get closer to the heart of their operation. Once the immediate threat at the hub was neutralized and the area declared safe, Jessica and I returned to the command center. Collins was already updated about the incident and the new lead. "We need to focus on this briefcase," Collins said, looking over the new information. "It might lead us to the main orchestrators of these attacks. We'll need to follow up on this lead quickly." The day was far from over, and our task was far from complete. The clowns' plans were still in motion, and we had to stay one step ahead. The safety of the city depended on our ability to unravel their network and prevent any further attacks. The tension was palpable, but our resolve was stronger than ever. We were committed to seeing this through, no matter the challenges ahead. The discovery of the briefcase with the clown logo became our top priority. With the immediate threats at the transportation hub neutralized, Jessica and I shifted our focus to tracking down this new lead. We knew that the briefcase could hold crucial information about the clown's broader plans. Collins assembled a team to assist in the search. We reviewed surveillance footage from various locations in the city, looking for any signs of the briefcase or its mysterious carrier. Our efforts were met with numerous dead ends until we received a tip from one of the local security companies. They had recorded footage of a person carrying a briefcase matching our description near an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. Jessica and I drove to the warehouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the desolate area. The warehouse was a relic of the past, its broken windows and peeling paint giving it an eerie appearance. We approached cautiously, our senses on high alert. Inside, the warehouse was dark and musty, the air heavy with the scent of decay. We searched methodically, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The area was littered with old crates and discarded materials, but there was no sign of the briefcase. Just as we were about to conclude our search, Jessica spotted a fresh trail of footprints leading to a storage room in the back. We followed the trail, our footsteps echoing off the walls. Inside the storage room, we found a wooden crate that looked recently disturbed. With a sense of anticipation, we pried open the crate. Inside, wrapped in a layer of plastic, was the briefcase. Our hearts raced as we opened it, revealing its contents. The briefcase held several documents, blueprints, and a stack of coded messages. The blueprints appeared to detail layouts of key city locations, likely the targets of the planned attacks. We immediately contacted Collins to relay our findings. He instructed us to transport the briefcase to the forensics lab for further analysis. The documents and blueprints could provide the final pieces of the puzzle we needed to fully understand the clown's plans and prevent any further attacks. As we left the warehouse, the weight of our discovery settled in. The city's fate hinged on our ability to decode the information and act swiftly. The stakes had never been higher, and we were determined to see this investigation through to the end. The clock was ticking, and the next steps would be critical in thwarting the clown's sinister agenda. The briefcase's contents were quickly transported to the forensics lab, where the documents and blueprints were examined under the watchful eye of Collins and his team. Jessica and I joined them in the lab, eager to decipher the clues and piece together the clown's remaining plans. The lab was abuzz with activity as forensic experts meticulously analyzed the blueprints. The room was filled with the hum of computers and the rustle of paper. Collins, focused and intense, reviewed the coded messages with a cryptographic expert who was working to crack the codes. Jessica and I scanned the blueprints, which detailed layouts of several high-profile targets, including government buildings, power stations, and emergency service centers. The precision with which these locations were mapped out suggested that the clowns had planned every detail with malicious intent. We noticed that some of the buildings were marked with symbols and notes indicating possible points of attack. As we delved deeper into the documents, we uncovered a series of coded messages that seemed to be communications between members of the clowns' network. The cryptographic expert was making progress in decoding these messages, but it was a painstaking process. The messages hinted at a series of staged attacks designed to divert attention and overwhelm the city's response capabilities. "The clowns are planning a diversion," Collins said, his voice grim. "They're going to hit multiple targets simultaneously, but they've also got secondary plans to create chaos and confusion. We need to pinpoint the timing and exact locations of these attacks." Jessica and I worked closely with the team to analyze the decoded messages. We discovered that the attacks were planned to coincide with a major public event scheduled for the upcoming weekend, a high-profile charity gala being hosted at a prominent downtown venue. This event would draw large crowds, making it an ideal target for the clowns' plans. "Given the scale of their operation, this gala is likely a primary target," I said. "We need to prioritize security at this event and ensure that all potential threats are neutralized." Collins agreed and immediately ordered increased security at the venue. A specialized task force was assigned to monitor and protect the gala, with Jessica and I overseeing the operation to ensure its success. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on us. The clowns' plans were becoming clearer, and the need to act swiftly and decisively was more urgent than ever. As we prepared for the upcoming weekend, every detail counted. The city's safety depended on our ability to thwart the clowns' plans and prevent any further disaster. As the charity gala approached, the tension in the command center was palpable. Jessica and I, along with Collins and the security teams, were fully engaged in ensuring that every detail was meticulously planned and executed. The gala, being the primary target, required an unprecedented level of security and coordination. The venue, a grand ballroom in the heart of downtown, was transformed into a fortress. Barricades were set up around the perimeter, and a rigorous security screening process was established for all attendees. Specially trained units were stationed at every entrance, and undercover officers were strategically placed throughout the crowd. The goal was clear: prevent any potential threats and keep the public safe. On the night of the gala, Jessica and I arrived early to oversee the final preparations. The venue was buzzing with activity as staff set up decorations and prepared for the evening's events. Despite the festive atmosphere, our focus remained on security. We conducted one final sweep of the area, checking for any potential vulnerabilities. As guests began to arrive, the security measures went into full effect. Jessica and I observed from a control room, monitoring live feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the venue. The room was filled with tension as we waited for any sign of trouble. The atmosphere outside was festive, with guests arriving in their finest attire, blissfully unaware of the heightened security measures in place. Around mid-evening, a disturbance was reported near one of the side entrances. An individual attempting to gain unauthorized access was subdued and questioned. The person was nervous, but had no apparent ties to the clowns. It was a false alarm, but the incident served as a reminder of the constant vigilance required. As the gala continued, Jessica and I remained on high alert. Every guest, every movement, and every unusual behavior was scrutinized. Hours passed without incident, and it became evident that our preparations were paying off. The event proceeded smoothly, and the heightened security measures prevented any potential threats from coming to fruition. By the end of the night, the gala had concluded without any incidents. The clowns had not made their move, and the city had been spared from the chaos they had intended to unleash. Exhausted but relieved, Jessica and I debriefed with Collins and the team, reflecting on the night's events. While the immediate threat was neutralized, the clowns' network was still out there. Our work was far from over. We knew that the city's safety depended on our continued vigilance and determination. The battle against the clowns was ongoing, and we were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The relief from the successful gala was short-lived. The next morning, Jessica and I returned to the command center, knowing the clowns were still out there, planning their next move. The tension was palpable as we gathered with Collins and the team to strategize our next steps. "We bought ourselves some time," Collins began, his voice steady but grave. "But the clowns won't stop. We need to keep the pressure on them and dismantle their network before they strike again." Our immediate focus was to follow up on the leads from the briefcase we found in the warehouse. The coded messages, blueprints, and documents provided a wealth of information, but we needed to piece it all together to stay ahead of the clowns. Jessica and I pored over the decoded messages with renewed urgency. The codes, while complex, were starting to reveal a pattern. We noticed that certain phrases and symbols repeated across different messages. These symbols seemed to correspond to specific locations and times, suggesting a coordinated plan that the clowns were still working to execute. One particular message stood out. It referenced a meeting at a remote location outside the city, a secluded cabin in the woods. The message suggested that this meeting was crucial to the clowns' upcoming plans. We had to act fast. "We need to check this out," I said, pointing to the decoded message. "If they're planning something big, this meeting could give us the information we need to stop them." Collins nodded. "Take a team and head to the cabin. Be discreet, but be prepared for anything." Jessica and I quickly gathered a small team of trusted officers and headed out. The drive to the cabin was tense, the road winding through dense forests that seemed to close in around us. As we approached the location, we parked a distance away and proceeded on foot to avoid detection. The cabin was old and weathered, nestled deep in the woods. We approached cautiously, our senses heightened. There were no signs of life outside, but we knew better than to let our guard down. We split into two groups to surround the cabin. Jessica and I took the front entrance while the other officers covered the back. With weapons drawn, we moved silently, ready for anything. I motioned for Jessica to check the door. It was unlocked. We exchanged a quick glance and pushed the door open, stepping inside with caution. The interior was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of damp wood. The cabin seemed deserted, but we knew appearances could be deceiving. As we moved deeper into the cabin, we heard faint voices coming from a room at the back. Our hearts raced as we approached, knowing that this could be our chance to gather crucial information or walk into a trap. The voices grew louder as we approached the back room of the cabin. Jessica and I exchanged a tense look, signaling each other to move with utmost caution. Every step was deliberate, every sound amplified in the silence of the cabin. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of adrenaline and fear coursing through me. Jessica positioned herself by the door, ready to breach. I took a deep breath, gripping my weapon tightly. With a swift nod, we burst into the room, our guns drawn, ready to confront whatever awaited us inside. To our surprise, the room was empty, save for a table covered in maps and documents. The voices we heard were coming from a small radio on the table, broadcasting a distorted conversation. We quickly moved to secure the room, checking for any hidden threats. It was clear we had just missed the clowns. "Damn it, they're gone," Jessica muttered, frustration evident in her voice. I felt it too, but we couldn't afford to lose focus. We needed to see what they had left behind. I approached the table, scanning the documents and maps spread out haphazardly. The maps were marked with red circles, each one highlighting a different part of the city. Notes and symbols, similar to those in the decoded messages, littered the margins. "This looks like a playbook," I said, picking up one of the maps. "These are their next targets." Jessica joined me, her eyes narrowing as she studied the notes. "They're planning multiple attacks again. We need to get this information back to Collins ASAP." As we gathered the documents, I noticed a folder partially hidden under the maps. Inside, we found photographs of various city landmarks and public events. One photo caught my eye, a picture of the city's main power grid. It was heavily marked, indicating it was a high-priority target. "This is bad," I said, showing Jessica the photo. "If they hit the power grid, the entire city could be plunged into chaos." Jessica nodded, her expression grim. "We need to move fast. Let's get this back to the command center." We exited the cabin with the documents in tow, the gravity of our discovery weighing heavily on us. The drive back to the city was filled with a sense of urgency. We couldn't let the clowns execute their plan. Back at the command center, we laid out the documents for Collins and the team. As they absorbed the information, a palpable tension filled the room. The stakes had never been higher. "We have their plans," Collins said, his voice resolute. "Now it's up to us to stop them." The next phase of our operation was clear. We had to act swiftly and decisively to protect the city from the clowns' impending attacks. Every second counted, and failure was not an option. As the weight of the new information settled in, Collins quickly devised a plan. The clowns had multiple targets, and we needed to act fast to prevent them from executing their scheme. He divided our team into specialized units, each assigned to one of the key locations marked on the clowns' maps. Jessica and I were tasked with securing the city's main power grid, the clowns' high-priority target. "We have to be thorough," Collins said, his gaze fixed on the map. "The clowns are counting on us missing something. Stay sharp and cover all bases." Jessica and I gathered our gear, ready to head out. The power grid was a sprawling complex on the outskirts of the city, and its importance couldn't be overstated. A successful attack there would plunge the entire city into darkness and chaos, providing the perfect cover for further attacks. We arrived at the power grid as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the industrial landscape. The facility was heavily secured, but the clowns had proven to be resourceful and relentless. We coordinated with the security team on site, ensuring every entrance and vulnerable point was covered. Our first priority was to sweep the perimeter. Jessica and I moved swiftly, checking for any signs of tampering or suspicious activity. The security team was on high alert, and their cooperation was crucial to our success. Every corner and crevice was meticulously inspected, but so far, everything appeared normal. "Let's check the control room," Jessica suggested. "If they're planning something, they might try to sabotage the system from within." We made our way to the control room, a nerve center of screens and control panels that monitored the entire power grid. The staff inside were tense but professional, fully aware of the potential threat. We briefed them on the situation, emphasizing the need for heightened vigilance. Suddenly, a commotion outside caught our attention. One of the security guards was signaling us frantically. We rushed out to find him pointing to a small, unmarked van parked near one of the maintenance entrances. It hadn't been there during our initial sweep. "This wasn't here before," the guard said, his voice edged with urgency. "We need to check it out." Approaching the van cautiously, Jessica and I drew our weapons, ready for anything. The van was locked, but a quick look inside revealed an assortment of tools and equipment that seemed out of place for a maintenance vehicle. I felt a chill run down my spine. This could be the clowns' doing. "Get the bomb squad here now," I said, backing away from the van. We couldn't take any chances. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the bomb squad to arrive. When they did, they worked swiftly to secure the area and inspect the van. Their careful, methodical approach was both reassuring and nerve-wracking. Finally, the bomb squad leader emerged, his expression serious. "We found an explosive device. It's sophisticated but disarmed now. You were right to be cautious." Relief washed over us, but we knew this was just one part of the clown's plan. We had to stay vigilant, ready for the next move. The night was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. With the bomb safely disarmed, a mix of relief and urgency propelled us forward. The clowns had clearly intended to disable the power grid, and there was no telling what other traps they might have set. We couldn't afford to let our guard down, not for a second. Jessica and I regrouped with the security team inside the control room. Collins had instructed us to maintain communication and stay coordinated with other units in the city. The clowns were undoubtedly monitoring our movements, and we had to be one step ahead. "We need to keep sweeping the area," Jessica said, her eyes scanning the live feeds on the monitors. "They might have more surprises in store." We split into smaller teams to cover more ground, each equipped with communication devices to stay in constant contact. Jessica and I took the western section of the complex, checking every building and piece of equipment for signs of sabotage. The tension was palpable, every shadow and sound making my pulse quicken. Halfway through our sweep, my radio crackled to life. "Jessica, Maddie, we found something," one of the security team members reported. "Maintenance building, southwest corner." We hurried over, our senses on high alert. Inside the maintenance building, we found the security team huddled around a set of electrical panels. One of the panels had been tampered with, wires cut and rerouted, clearly meant to cause a power surge and overload the grid. "Looks like they were planning a double hit," Jessica muttered, examining the sabotage. "Disable the grid with the bomb, and if that failed, trigger a surge." "We need to fix this, fast," I said, contacting Collins. "We've got another sabotage attempt here. We'll need the technical team to reset the wiring and ensure everything is secure." Collins responded quickly. "I'm sending the technical team over. Keep an eye out for any more surprises." While waiting for the technical team, we continued to search the area. It felt like we were racing against the clock, knowing the clowns might strike again at any moment. Every passing minute was a reminder of the precarious situation we were in. The technical team arrived and got to work, their expertise evident in the speed and precision with which they assessed and repaired the damaged panel. As they worked, Jessica and I stood guard, watching for any signs of movement or suspicious activity. "All set," the lead technician finally announced. "The grid should be secure now." "Good work," I said, relaying the update to Collins. "The power grid is secure, but we need to stay on high alert." As we regrouped in the control room, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. We had thwarted the clowns' immediate plans, but we knew this was just one battle in an ongoing war. The clowns were cunning and persistent, and we had to be ready for whatever they threw at us next. "We did good tonight," Jessica said, her voice steady but tired. "But this isn't over. We need to stay sharp." I nodded, sharing her resolve. The fight against the clowns was far from over, and we would continue to protect our city with everything we had. The power grid was secure, but the sense of victory was fleeting. The clowns had proven themselves to be resourceful and relentless. As Jessica and I regrouped with the rest of the team, Collins gathered us for a quick debrief. "We've managed to prevent a major disaster tonight," Collins said, his voice firm. "But the clowns won't stop here. We need to stay vigilant and anticipate their next move." The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. We had won this round, but the game was far from over. As the team dispersed to continue our efforts across the city, Jessica and I were tasked with monitoring the surveillance feeds and coordinating with other units. The control room buzzed with activity as officers communicated updates and relayed information. "Keep an eye on any unusual activity," I told Jessica as we settled in front of the monitors. "The clowns are bound to try something else." Hours passed in a blur of tension and heightened awareness. The city, illuminated by the glow of streetlights and buildings, seemed deceptively calm, but we knew better. The clowns thrived in the shadows, and we had to stay one step ahead. Suddenly, one of the screens flickered, drawing our attention. A figure in a clown mask appeared near a closed shopping mall. The timestamp showed the footage was live. My heart raced as I alerted Collins and the nearby units. "Mall perimeter, southeast entrance," I reported. "Possible clown sighting. We need eyes on that location immediately." Within minutes, a team arrived at the mall. The tension in the control room was palpable as we watched the live feed from their body cams. The officers moved stealthily, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Control, this is Unit 5, came the crackling voice over the radio. "We have visual confirmation. Clown mask, moving towards the loading docks." The officers advanced, their movements coordinated and precise. Jessica and I watched, holding our breath as they closed in on the suspect. The figure turned, spotting the approaching officers, and broke into a run. "We've got a runner," the officer reported, "pursuing on foot, requesting backup." The chase was intense, the suspect weaving through the maze of loading docks and alleyways. Our eyes remained glued to the screens, willing the officers to catch up. The clowns had evaded capture too many times, and we couldn't let this one slip away. "Control! We've apprehended the suspect!" came the victorious call. The figure was subdued, handcuffed, and led to a waiting patrol car. Relief washed over us, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one clown. The network was larger, more insidious. As the suspect was brought in for questioning, we knew it was a small but significant victory. Each capture brought us closer to dismantling their operations. "Good work, everyone," Collins said, his voice resonating with a mix of pride and caution. "But stay sharp. This is far from over." Jessica and I exchanged a tired but determined look. We had taken another step in protecting our city, but the fight was far from finished. The clowns were out there, plotting their next move, and we would be ready. The apprehension of the clown suspect brought a momentary sense of relief, but the work was far from over. Collins directed us to the interrogation room where the suspect was being held. Jessica and I exchanged a glance, steeling ourselves for what lay ahead. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. As we entered the dimly lit room, the suspect sat handcuffed to the table, his clown mask removed to reveal a young man with wild, darting eyes. He looked disheveled, his hair matted and his clothes dirty. There was a strange, almost manic energy about him, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air. "What's your name?" Jessica asked, her voice steady but firm. The man didn't respond, staring at us with a mix of defiance and fear. We had to break through his resistance, and fast. I leaned in, trying a different approach. "Listen, we know you're part of something big," I said, keeping my voice calm but insistent. "Help us, and things might go easier for you." He laughed, a high-pitched, unsettling sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You think you can stop us? You have no idea what's coming." Jessica and I exchanged a glance. His words were cryptic, but they hinted at a larger, more sinister plan. We had to keep pressing. "Who are you working with?" Jessica demanded. "Tell us about the clowns." He shook his head, his laughter fading into a grim smile. "Even if I wanted to, I couldn't tell you. They don't share everything with us." His evasiveness was frustrating, but we had to stay patient. I decided to try a different tactic, hoping to catch him off guard. "Why the power grid?" I asked. "What's your next target?" The man's eyes flickered with a hint of uncertainty. It was subtle, but it was there. "You'll find out soon enough," he muttered, his voice low. Before we could press further, Collins entered the room, signaling us to step outside. We followed him into the hallway, where he briefed us on the next steps. "We need to dig deeper," Collins said, his tone serious. "The suspect might not know everything, but he could still lead us to someone who does." Jessica nodded. "What's the plan?" "We'll keep him in custody and continue the interrogation," Collins replied. "In the meantime, I want you two to follow up on any leads from the documents we found at the cabin. There might be something we missed." As we headed back to the control room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The suspect's cryptic warnings echoed in my mind, fueling my determination to uncover the clown's plan and stop them before it was too late. We spent the next few hours poring over the documents again, looking for any overlooked clues. Every detail, no matter how small, could be crucial. As the night wore on, our fatigue grew, but so did our resolve. The clowns were out there, plotting their next move, and we were their only obstacle. We had to be relentless, vigilant, and ready for anything. Back in the control room, the atmosphere was thick with determination and urgency. The documents we recovered from the cabin sprawled across the table, covered in annotations and sticky notes. Jessica and I took a deep breath, ready to dive back into the mountain of evidence. We couldn't afford to miss anything. "Let's start with the maps again," Jessica suggested, spreading out the various sheets covered in cryptic symbols and markings. "There might be a pattern we overlooked." I nodded, focusing on a map of the city with several points circled in red. Each point represented a potential target, but the clowns had been careful not to reveal too much. As we compared the maps to our earlier notes, something clicked in my mind. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a series of locations near the city's industrial district. "These sites form a rough triangle, and the power grid sits right in the middle." Jessica's eyes widened. If they managed to hit all 3 points simultaneously, it could cause a massive blackout, even if we secured the power grid. Collins joined us, having overheard our discussion. "Good catch. We need to secure those locations immediately. I'll dispatch teams to each site." As Collins coordinated the teams, Jessica and I continued to sift through the documents. Among the financial records and supply lists, we found a handwritten note that stood out. It was a list of names, some crossed out, others highlighted. "These names," Jessica mused. "They must be people involved in the clown network." I scanned the list, recognizing a few names from our earlier investigations, but one name, highlighted and underlined, caught my attention. "Robert Bobby Wilson," I read aloud. "He's the guy we heard rumors about, the one known for his eccentric behavior." Jessica nodded. "He's been on our radar, but we never had enough to bring him in." This might be our chance. We relayed the information to Collins, who immediately put out an alert for Bobby Wilson. If he's involved, we need to find him and bring him in for questioning. With the teams dispatched and the alert for Wilson issued, Jessica and I returned to the maps, determined to uncover any further connections. Hours passed in a blur of analysis and cross-referencing. Just as fatigue threatened to overtake us, a call came through from one of the teams. "Control, this is Unit 3. We've secured the first site and found something suspicious. There's a hidden compartment in one of the buildings." Jessica and I shared a look of triumph. "We're on our way," I replied, grabbing our gear. Arriving at the industrial site, we found the team gathered around a steel door concealed behind a stack of crates. The hidden compartment was small but packed with equipment, explosives, blueprints, and communication devices. "This must be one of their staging areas," Jessica said, inspecting the contents. "We've hit the jackpot." As we documented the evidence and prepared it for transport, a sense of accomplishment filled the air. This was a major breakthrough, but we knew it was just the beginning. The clown's network was vast, and Bobby Wilson was still out there. "We need to keep pushing," I said, determination in my voice. "We're getting closer. We can't let up now." Jessica nodded, her resolve matching mine. The clowns might be elusive, but we were relentless. We would follow every lead, turn over every stone, and bring them down. The safety of our city depended on it. The discovery of the hidden compartment reinvigorated us. It was a solid lead, a tangible piece of the puzzle, but we knew we couldn't stop there. Bobby Wilson was still out there, and every second counted. Back in the control room, we regrouped to plan our next move. Collins stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding attention. "We need to track down Bobby Wilson immediately," he said, his voice resolute. "He's our best lead on uncovering the full extent of the clown's plans." Jessica and I nodded in agreement. I pulled up the city's surveillance feeds, hoping to spot any trace of Wilson. The city was vast, but we had to start somewhere. "I'll check known associates and frequent haunts," Jessica suggested, already typing furiously on her keyboard. "If he's hiding, he's likely not alone." We divided our tasks, each of us laser-focused on our screens. As I scanned through footage and cross-referenced locations, I couldn't shake the feeling that Wilson was slipping through our fingers. The clowns were cunning, and Wilson was likely a step ahead. Just then, a hit came through on Jessica's screen. "Got something," she said, excitement lacing her voice. "A sighting near the old warehouse district. He was spotted with a group matching the clown's description." Collins moved swiftly. "Send units to the warehouse district. We need eyes on that location now." The response was immediate. Teams were dispatched, and the tension in the control room was palpable. We watched the live feeds from the officers' body cams, the adrenaline coursing through us as they navigated the dark, narrow alleys of the district. "Stay sharp," I reminded everyone. "Wilson is dangerous. We don't know what he's capable of." As the officers closed in on the suspected location, the silence was deafening. Every creak and shadow seemed amplified. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. "Control, this is Unit 7. Visual confirmation on Wilson. He's entering a warehouse with 2 others. "Move in," Collins ordered, his voice calm but urgent. "Secure the perimeter and proceed with caution." The officers advanced, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. We watched anxiously as they breached the warehouse door. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Scattered papers, makeshift beds, and the unmistakable smell of gasoline. "Control, we've got Wilson," an officer reported. "He's resisting, requesting backup." My heart pounded as I watched the struggle unfold. The officers moved with precision, eventually subduing Wilson and his accomplices. It was a hard-fought victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Good job, everyone," Collins said, his voice filled with relief. "Bring them in for questioning." Back in the control room, we finally allowed ourselves a moment to breathe. Capturing Wilson was a significant breakthrough, but we knew it was just the beginning. There were still questions to be answered, and more pieces of the puzzle to uncover. As Wilson was brought in, his defiant gaze met ours. He had the look of a man who knew more than he was letting on, and it would be our job to extract every bit of information. "We did it," Jessica said quietly, her eyes never leaving Wilson. "We're getting closer." I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. The clown's network was beginning to unravel, and we were closing in. We would press Wilson for answers, follow every lead, and ensure that our city remained safe. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like we were gaining ground. The interrogation room was cold, the flickering fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. Bobby Wilson sat across from us, his expression a mix of defiance and weariness. The interview had begun, and every second was crucial. We needed to extract information that could lead us to dismantling the entire clown network. Jessica and I took our seats, and Collins, who had joined us, gave a nod to start. "Let's make this as painless as possible, Bobby," Jessica said, her voice steady. "We have evidence connecting you to the clown activities. It's in your best interest to cooperate." Wilson's gaze was distant, his mind clearly wrestling with the decision. "I'm not saying a word," he said with a sneer. "You think you can scare me into talking?" "We're not trying to scare you," I interjected. "We're trying to save lives. Your actions have consequences, and you know it. Help us understand what's going on, and maybe you'll get a lighter sentence." He shifted in his chair, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "You don't understand," he said slowly. "This isn't just some game. The clowns, they're planning something big, something you can't even imagine." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes locked on Wilson's. "What kind of something big? We need specifics, Bobby. The more you tell us, the better chance you have to avoid the worst." Wilson's demeanor softened just a fraction. He was obviously torn between his loyalty to the group and his desire to avoid a harsher fate. "All right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you what I know, but you have to promise me protection." Collins exchanged a glance with Jessica and me before nodding. "We can arrange that. Start talking." Wilson took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice shaky but determined. "The clowns have been planning a series of attacks. They're targeting critical infrastructure, power grids, water supplies. The goal is to create chaos, to make people fear their own safety." Jessica's pen flew across her notepad as she recorded his words. "Why? What's their endgame?" "They want to make a statement," Wilson said, his eyes haunted. "They believe society is broken, and they want to show that they can bring it to its knees. They want to prove they have the power to disrupt everything." The gravity of his words sank in. The clowns were not just causing mischief, they were aiming for widespread destruction. "Where are they planning the next attack?" I pressed. Wilson hesitated, then revealed, "There's a meeting set for tonight at an old warehouse. They're finalizing their plans." Collins stood up, his expression grim. "We need to act fast. This could be our chance to catch them all." As we prepared to move out, I glanced back at Wilson. His information had given us a crucial lead, but the danger was far from over. We were about to confront the heart of the clown network, and the stakes had never been higher. The clock was ticking, and we had to be ready for whatever lay ahead. The urgency in the air was palpable as we prepared to head to the old warehouse. The information from Bobby Wilson had given us a crucial lead, but it also meant that the clowns were likely on high alert. We had to move swiftly and strategically to prevent another catastrophe. Collins, Jessica, and I huddled around a map of the warehouse district, reviewing our plan one last time. "The warehouse is in a secluded area," Collins explained, pointing to a spot on the map. "We need to secure all exits and approach with caution. We don't know how many of them will be there or what kind of defenses they might have set up." Jessica checked her gear, her expression focused. "We've got teams positioned around the perimeter, but we need to make sure they're ready for anything. We don't want to walk into a trap." I nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility on my shoulders. "Let's make sure everyone knows their role. We're aiming for a surprise, but we need to be prepared for a fight." As the teams moved into position, the tension was almost unbearable. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a dark, imposing structure that seemed to swallow the fading light. We approached cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the gloom, every step echoing ominously in the quiet. Collins gave the signal, and the team began their advance. We entered the warehouse, our senses heightened, scanning for any sign of the clowns. The interior was a maze of crates and machinery, dimly lit by the occasional flickering light bulb. Suddenly, a noise from the far end of the warehouse caught our attention. We moved stealthily toward it, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. As we rounded a corner, we saw a group of figures huddled around a table covered with blueprints and supplies. Jessica's eyes met mine, and we signaled the team to move in. We approached the group with precision, our weapons drawn, ready for whatever awaited us. The clowns looked up, startled and bewildered. "Freeze!" Collins shouted, his voice echoing through the warehouse. "Police! Don't move!" The clowns scrambled in confusion, but our team was ready. Within moments, we had the area secured, the clowns subdued and restrained. The warehouse, once a center of their planning, was now under our control. Jessica and I began to sort through the documents and supplies, our hearts racing. This was a major victory, but we knew it was only part of the larger puzzle. As we gathered evidence and interviewed the clowns, the reality of the situation sank in. We had disrupted their plans, but the threat was far from over. Collins approached, a satisfied but weary look on his face. "Good work. We've made a significant dent in their operations tonight." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. "We still have a lot of work ahead of us, but tonight we've shown them that we won't back down." As we prepared to leave the warehouse, I glanced around at the dismantled equipment and captured clowns. It was a step forward, a crucial one. But the clowns were still out there, and their network was still operational. The battle was far from over, and we had to stay vigilant. The morning after the raid was eerily quiet. The warehouse, now a scene of chaos and evidence collection, had been cleared of the clowns and their equipment. The evidence was being processed, and the team was meticulously documenting everything. Despite the sense of accomplishment, there was an underlying tension. The clowns were still out there, and their plans were still a threat. Jessica and I met in the conference room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, casting long shadows on the walls. The room was cluttered with files, maps, and a whiteboard filled with scribbled notes. The intensity of the previous night seemed almost surreal in the daylight. "All right, we've made significant progress," Jessica began, flipping through a stack of documents. "But we need to figure out the next steps. We've disrupted their operations, but we haven't stopped them entirely." I nodded, rubbing my eyes. The lack of sleep was starting to catch up with me. "We need to sift through all this evidence and see if we can find any leads. Bobby Wilson gave us some information, but it might not be complete." Collins joined us, his expression serious. "We've got a team working on analyzing the documents and equipment we seized. They're also looking into the connections between the clowns and any potential financial backers or collaborators." Jessica looked up from her notes, her face illuminated by a mix of determination and fatigue. "What about the clowns who were arrested? Are they talking?" Collins shook his head. "Not much. They're tight-lipped, likely hoping to be bailed out or offered a plea deal. But we're working on breaking them down. We'll get more information eventually." The door to the conference room opened, and one of the officers from the previous night walked in holding a folder. "We've got something," the officer said, handing the folder to Jessica. Jessica opened it and scanned the contents. "This is good. These documents could lead us to more of their operations. We need to follow up on these leads immediately." As Jessica and I reviewed the new information, Collins began coordinating with other units to investigate the leads further. It was clear that the clown network was more extensive and complex than we had anticipated. The raid had been a crucial step, but the fight was far from over. "We're making headway," I said, trying to stay optimistic. "But we need to stay focused. The clowns might regroup and strike again." Jessica nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed. Let's dig into these leads and see where they take us. We're not done yet." The work ahead was daunting, but there was a renewed sense of purpose. We had disrupted their plans and taken a significant step forward, but the danger remained. As we delved into the evidence and pursued new leads, we knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. The data from the warehouse raid was being analyzed with a sense of urgency. Every document, every piece of equipment was scrutinized for clues that might lead us to the core of the clown network. As Jessica and I worked through the piles of evidence, Collins kept us updated on the progress of the interrogation and the investigation. The conference room had become our war room, a chaotic space where every surface was covered with maps, photos, and notes. The large whiteboard was a mosaic of colored markers showing connections between various players in the network. It was clear that this was no ordinary criminal operation. It was a complex web of individuals with far-reaching influence. "Look at this," Jessica said, pointing to a newly discovered set of documents. These financial records might connect the clowns to several prominent businesses. If we can trace the funds, we might uncover more about their supporters. I leaned in, examining the documents closely. These transactions are significant. They could reveal hidden layers of the network. We need to get these analyzed ASAP and see if we can identify any potential backers. Collins entered the room, holding a stack of new reports. We've made some progress with the interrogations. One of the clowns, a guy named Rick, started talking after we showed him the evidence we found at the warehouse. He's mentioned a possible meeting location. Jessica's eyes lit up. Where? Any details? Collins nodded. Rick mentioned a location, a disused factory on the outskirts of town. It's supposed to be a new base of operations for them. He didn't give us much, but it's worth investigating. Let's move quickly, I said. If they're setting up a new base, we need to find out what they're planning and shut it down before they can escalate their activities. Jessica grabbed her coat and started assembling a team. I'll coordinate with the surveillance unit and prepare a tactical approach. We need to be ready for anything. As we prepared for the new operation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were racing against time. The clowns had been scattered but not defeated. If they were regrouping, their plans could be even more dangerous than before. Collins placed a hand on my shoulder, offering a brief moment of reassurance. We've come a long way, but we're not done yet. We need to stay sharp and act decisively. The urgency was palpable as we geared up for the next phase of the investigation. Every moment counted, and every lead was crucial. With the factory as our next target, we were on the brink of uncovering what the clowns had been planning. The stakes had never been higher, but we were determined to see this through to the end. The abandoned factory loomed in the distance, its derelict structure a stark contrast against the setting sun. The crumbling walls and broken windows spoke of years of neglect, but tonight it was the focus of our operation. The new base of the clown network was rumored to be hidden within these walls, and we had to approach with the utmost caution. Jessica, Collins, and I stood with our team at the edge of the factory's perimeter, our breaths visible in the chilly evening air. We had assembled a tactical unit, equipped with gear and ready for a potential confrontation. The factory's isolation made it an ideal location for their activities, but it also meant that any wrong move could be disastrous. All right, everyone, listen up, Jessica began, her voice steady and commanding. We're going to sweep the perimeter first. The clowns might have set up traps or security measures. Stay sharp and communicate any findings immediately. We moved in a coordinated fashion, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we searched the factory grounds. The area was eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of rustling debris. I kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary, my senses heightened by the gravity of the situation. As we entered the factory, the smell of mildew and rust filled the air. The interior was a labyrinth of old machinery and abandoned workspaces. We used infrared cameras and motion sensors to check for hidden threats, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Collins signaled for us to halt as he spotted something unusual, a set of footprints leading to a side entrance. "Looks like we're not alone," he said, pointing to the faint trail. We followed the tracks cautiously, our weapons ready. The footprints led us to a large, dimly lit room at the back of the factory. Inside, we found a group of clowns huddled around a table, examining maps and blueprints. The atmosphere was tense, their conversations hushed and frantic. Jessica gestured for us to prepare for an entry. "On my mark," she whispered, "we move in and secure the area." With a nod, I readied myself, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Jessica counted down, and as soon as she gave the signal, we burst into the room. "Police! Hands up!" I shouted, aiming my flashlight at the group. The clowns froze in shock, their expressions a mix of fear and surprise. The operation was swift. We moved to detain the clowns, securing the room and preventing any escape. As we cuffed the last of the suspects, Jessica began gathering the documents and equipment scattered around the room. This raid was a significant breakthrough. We had intercepted their planning and dismantled a crucial part of their network. Collins came over, a look of relief on his face. "Great job. We've got valuable intel here. Let's get everything back to HQ and see what we can learn from it." As we prepared to leave the factory, the weight of our success settled in. We had disrupted their operations once again, but the clowns were relentless. The fight was ongoing, and we had to remain vigilant. The night's work was far from over, but each victory brought us closer to unraveling the full extent of their plans. The factory's skeletal remains were now eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of police radios and the occasional clatter of equipment being packed up. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. The factory raid had yielded crucial information, but the job was far from done. Jessica and I sat at our desks, surrounded by stacks of files and the evidence we'd collected. The documents were spread out before us, a complex web of information that needed to be deciphered. Collins was on the phone with the forensic team, coordinating the analysis of the materials we had seized. "Look at this," Jessica said, sliding a set of documents over to me. "These are financial records tied to several high-profile businesses. We might be looking at a larger conspiracy here." I studied the records closely. This could link the clowns to more influential figures. If we can trace these connections, we might be able to identify the financial backers behind their operations. As we pored over the documents, Collins approached with a new set of files. "We've got some interesting developments from the forensic team. They've identified traces of high-grade explosives and communication devices in the factory." Jessica's eyes widened. "Explosives? That changes things. They were planning something big." "Exactly," Collins replied. "We need to figure out what their endgame was. If they were preparing for a major event, we have to find out what and where." The room was filled with the sounds of typing and murmured conversations as our team worked diligently. Jessica and I began cross-referencing the financial records with known associates of the Clown Network. The goal was to identify anyone who might be providing logistical or financial support. Hours passed in a blur of activity. We were making progress, but the more we uncovered, the more apparent it became that this was a vast and deeply entrenched operation. "I've found something," I said, holding up a document. "There's a name here that matches one of the contacts we've been tracking, a businessman with significant ties to various charitable organizations." Jessica took the document and scanned it quickly. "This could be our link to uncovering more about their financial backing. We need to follow up on this immediately." Collins nodded in agreement. "We'll coordinate with financial investigators and start surveillance on this individual. If they're involved, they could lead us to the mastermind behind the Clown Network." As the night wore on, fatigue was starting to set in, but the urgency kept us going. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to dismantling the entire network. We were on the brink of uncovering something monumental, and the stakes were higher than ever. Despite the long hours and mounting pressure, a sense of determination fueled us. The clowns had been a formidable foe, but with each lead and each breakthrough, we were inching closer to putting an end to their dangerous plans. The following morning was a stark contrast to the previous night's frenetic pace. The precinct buzzed with activity as the team worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle of the Clown Network. Despite the early hour, everyone was focused, driven by the urgency of our mission. We were close, and the final pieces were within reach. Jessica and I sat in a quiet corner of the conference room, surrounded by freshly printed documents and updated reports. The name we'd discovered, David Hawthorne, was proving to be a significant lead. Hawthorne was a well-known philanthropist with extensive connections in the business world. His name had come up repeatedly in the financial records we'd examined. "I've cross-checked Hawthorne's connections," Jessica said, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and excitement. "He's linked to several high-profile charitable foundations. It's possible these organizations were used as fronts for funneling money to the clowns." I nodded, scanning through the related documents. "We need to delve deeper into his activities. If these charities are involved, we might uncover more about their operational plans." Collins joined us, holding a set of updated surveillance reports. "We've put Hawthorne under surveillance. Our agents are monitoring his activities and communications. We're also looking into the charities he's affiliated with to see if there's any suspicious financial activity." "Great," Jessica replied. "Let's also prepare to coordinate with other law enforcement agencies. If this network is as extensive as we think, we might need additional resources to handle it." The room was filled with the hum of ongoing investigations and the steady tapping of keyboards as our team worked through the morning. The pressure was palpable, but so was the sense of accomplishment. We were inching closer to uncovering the full extent of the Clown Network's operations. Just as we were about to take a brief break, an officer burst into the room, a look of urgency on his face. "We've got a development. Hawthorne's scheduled to attend a high-profile charity gala tonight. Our surveillance team has picked up chatter indicating it might be a key meeting point for the network." Jessica's eyes widened. "A gala? That's a prime opportunity. We need to get a team on the ground. If this is where they're consolidating their plans, it's crucial we act fast." Collins nodded, already making arrangements. "I'll coordinate with the team and get additional officers in place. We'll need to approach this carefully to avoid tipping them off." The adrenaline kicked in as we prepared for the next phase of the operation. The gala was a high-stakes event, and the clown's plans might finally come to light. We were about to make our move, and every second counted. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and we were ready to uncover the full extent of the network's dangerous activities. The gala was in full swing by the time we arrived at the opulent ballroom. The venue was a luxurious old-world hotel that had been transformed into a glittering spectacle of high society. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the elegantly dressed guests who mingled, their laughter and conversation blending into a hum of sophistication. Jessica, Collins, and I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, blending in with our formal attire. Our primary objective was to keep a low profile while monitoring David Hawthorne and identifying any potential connections to the clown network. Our team had set up discreet surveillance positions around the venue, each member equipped with the latest tech to capture any suspicious activity. As we navigated through the crowd, Jessica whispered into her earpiece, coordinating with our team. "Stay alert. We're looking for any signs of the network's members or suspicious behavior. Hawthorne is our primary focus, but don't ignore any unexpected developments." I scanned the room, my eyes constantly moving from one group to another. The guests were engrossed in the evening's festivities, unaware of the covert operation unfolding around them. Hawthorne had not yet arrived, but we had to remain vigilant. His appearance could signal a critical moment in our investigation. The clock ticked on, and just after 8 o'clock, Hawthorne made his entrance. He was accompanied by a small entourage, his presence commanding attention as he greeted various high-profile guests. His demeanor was polished and charismatic, but beneath that surface, we were determined to uncover his true connections. Collins, positioned near the bar, caught a glimpse of two individuals who seemed to be shadowing Hawthorne. Their behavior was inconspicuous, but they were dressed in similar dark suits, creating a subtle, uniform presence. "I've got eyes on 2 potential associates," he reported quietly. "They're keeping close to Hawthorne. It's worth investigating further." Jessica gave a nod of approval. "Good. Let's approach carefully. We need to gather as much information as possible without drawing attention." I moved toward the bar, maintaining a casual demeanor while keeping an eye on the 2 individuals. They were engaged in conversation with Hawthorne, their interactions seeming too deliberate to be mere pleasantries. As the evening progressed, our focus remained sharp. The gala was a perfect cover for covert meetings and deals, and we had to ensure we didn't miss any crucial details. Every moment was critical, and with each passing minute, we were one step closer to uncovering the full extent of the Clown Network's operations. The atmosphere in the ballroom grew increasingly charged as the evening progressed. The sound of clinking glasses and soft music created an illusion of tranquility, but beneath that surface the tension was palpable. Hawthorne was in his element, circulating through the crowd with a practiced ease that masked the undercurrents of his dealings. I kept my distance from the central figures, maintaining a casual but strategic position near the entrance. From this vantage point, I could observe Hawthorne and his 2 shadowy associates more closely. They had engaged in several animated conversations, exchanging documents and making discreet hand signals that hinted at something more significant than mere small talk. Jessica joined me after a brief detour, her expression focused. "I've checked with our surveillance team. We've picked up some encrypted messages being sent from one of Hawthorne's associates. We need to decipher them to understand their full meaning." "Got it," I replied, nodding. "Let's stay on Hawthorne for now. If he's meeting with anyone else or making significant moves, we need to be there." As the night continued, Hawthorne and his associates moved toward a more secluded area of the ballroom. This section was less frequented by guests, surrounded by large potted plants and draped curtains that created a natural barrier from prying eyes. My intuition told me that something crucial was about to happen. Jessica and I maneuvered through the crowd, carefully positioning ourselves within earshot without being too obvious. From our vantage point, we could overhear snippets of conversation. The tone was serious, and the words "final details" and "operation" caught my attention. Just then, one of the associates handed Hawthorne a folder, its contents carefully concealed. Hawthorne accepted it with a nod, his face a mask of concentration. He glanced around, ensuring they were not being observed too closely, before tucking the folder under his arm. "That folder is key," Jessica whispered, her eyes narrowing. "If we can get a hold of it or photograph its contents, it might reveal their next move." Collins, positioned at the perimeter of the ballroom, signaled us discreetly. He had spotted additional security personnel closing in on the secluded area, likely hired to protect Hawthorne's clandestine meeting. "Let's move," Jessica instructed. "We need to act before they disperse." We made our way towards the secluded area, blending into the crowd as much as possible. Our objective was clear: obtain the folder or gather any information that could expose the Clown Network's plans. The stakes were high, and every second counted. The operation was coming to a head, and our next steps would be critical in unraveling the full extent of the conspiracy. As Jessica and I edged closer to the secluded area, we kept our movements discreet, blending in with the crowd. Our goal was to intercept the folder or gather any critical information without alerting Hawthorne's security detail or tipping off our targets. The stakes were high, and we had to act swiftly. The trio, Hawthorne and his two associates, were now deep in conversation, their voices hushed but intense. The secluded alcove was shielded by a large potted palm and velvet curtains, creating a semi-private space. We positioned ourselves strategically behind a nearby column, using it as cover while keeping an eye on the folder. "Jessica, I need you to keep watch," I murmured. "I'm going to try to get a closer look at that folder. If we can get a clear shot or even a brief glance, it could provide the breakthrough we need." Jessica nodded, her gaze sharp as she scanned the area for any potential threats. I carefully moved closer, my heart racing with anticipation. The conversation among the trio continued, the details of their discussion occasionally reaching my ears. Words like finalizing, network, and deployment floated through the air, adding urgency to our mission. Hawthorne, now holding the folder more loosely, was momentarily distracted by a new guest approaching the area. His associates seemed preoccupied with the new arrival, creating a brief window of opportunity. With a quick but steadying breath, I closed the distance, my eyes fixed on the folder. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out my phone equipped with a high-resolution camera. Using the column for cover, I aimed to capture a clear image of the folder's contents without drawing attention. Just as I was about to take the shot, a sudden movement caught my eye. One of the security personnel had shifted position, almost as if sensing something amiss. I froze, holding my breath, as the guard's gaze swept across the room. Jessica, noticing my hesitation, subtly signaled to me. She made a slight movement to distract the guard by accidentally bumping into a nearby table, causing a minor commotion. The distraction was enough. I took the photo quickly, capturing a glimpse of documents and a list of names that seemed crucial. As I retreated back to our position, Jessica joined me, her expression a mix of relief and excitement. "Did you get it?" "Got it," I confirmed, showing her the image. "We need to analyze this ASAP. There's a list of names here that might be key players in the Clown Network." Collins, who had been monitoring our progress, approached with a concerned look. "We've got to move. Hawthorne's security is tightening up, and we need to extract ourselves before things get messy." We nodded in agreement, carefully making our way back through the crowd. The folder's contents might be the breakthrough we needed to dismantle the Clown Network. With our evidence secured, the next phase of our operation was already in motion. The evening had been a success, but the real work was just beginning. We managed to slip out of the gala without drawing too much attention, our exit smooth but hurried. Once outside, the cool night air hit us with a welcome contrast to the stuffy, opulent ballroom. Jessica, Collins, and I quickly regrouped in a secluded area near the valet stand, away from the remaining guests. I pulled out my phone to review the image I'd taken of the folder. The picture was clear enough to reveal several documents, including a list of names and what appeared to be detailed plans for a series of upcoming events. My fingers trembled slightly as I zoomed in, trying to make sense of the text. Jessica leaned in, her expression serious. "What do we have?" "There's a list of names here," I said, pointing at the screen. "Some of them are familiar, local business people and politicians. It looks like they're involved in the network, either directly or indirectly. There's also a schedule of events, which might be key to understanding their operations." Collins, peering over my shoulder, nodded in agreement. "This could be the break we've been looking for. If we can connect these names to specific activities or locations, it could help us dismantle the entire network." "We need to act fast," Jessica said, her voice steady but urgent. "Let's get this information to our tech team for a deeper analysis. We need to cross-reference these names with our existing data and see if there's any pattern or connection we're missing." Collins made a call to our tech support team, instructing them to prioritize the analysis of the documents. While he did that, Jessica and I went over the list of names, trying to recall any prior mentions or links to the clown network. "Some of these names have come up before," I said, remembering a few from earlier investigations. "They're known for their involvement in high-profile charities and business ventures. It makes sense that they would be involved in something like this." Jessica's eyes narrowed in determination. "We need to identify their roles and connections quickly. If they're meeting again soon, we might have a chance to catch them in the act." As Collins ended his call, he rejoined us, a look of focused anticipation on his face. "The tech team is on it. We'll have a more detailed analysis shortly. In the meantime, let's review what we know and prepare for the next steps." The sense of urgency was palpable. We had gathered crucial evidence, but the real challenge lay in unraveling the web of connections and plans. The night was far from over, and with the information we had, the next phase of our operation promised to be pivotal in bringing down the clown network once and for all. The drive back to our temporary headquarters was tense. Each of us was lost in thought, replaying the night's events and the implications of the information we'd uncovered. The city lights blurred past the windows as Collins navigated the streets with a focused determination. Once we arrived, we immediately moved to the conference room, where the team had already begun analyzing the data. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as everyone gathered around the large table, eager to see what the tech team had uncovered from the documents. Collins set the folders down and looked at me. "Let's see what we've got." I nodded and connected my phone to the main screen, displaying the photo of the folder for everyone to see. The team began to sift through the data, cross-referencing names and events with our existing intelligence. Jessica stood next to me, her eyes scanning the screen. "We need to focus on any patterns or connections that might point us to upcoming activities or meetings. The sooner we can identify these, the sooner we can take action." Our tech team worked efficiently, typing furiously and analyzing the data. Patterns began to emerge. Certain names were repeated across different documents, and some of the upcoming events in the schedule matched known locations tied to the clown network. The network's influence appeared to stretch further than we initially realized, involving several prominent figures. One of the analysts, a young woman named Mia, looked up from her computer with a revelation. "We've identified a recurring location that seems to be central to their operations, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It's listed as a meeting point for several key figures." Jessica's eyes widened. "That could be our next target. If we can get inside and gather more evidence, it might provide the missing link we need to unravel their entire network." Collins nodded, pulling out a map. "Let's plan our approach. We need to gather as much evidence as possible while minimizing the risk of detection. We'll need to prepare for a possible confrontation." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. The warehouse could hold the key to dismantling the clown network, but it also posed significant risks. We needed a precise plan to ensure our success. As the team continued to prepare, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The information we'd gathered tonight was a significant step forward, and with it came the promise of uncovering the full extent of the network's operations. The operation was far from over, but we were now closer than ever to bringing this conspiracy to light. The dawn broke with a chill that cut through the last remnants of our restless night. The team gathered at our temporary headquarters, faces etched with fatigue but illuminated by determination. Today was pivotal. We were about to execute a plan that could potentially dismantle the entire clown network. Collins, Jessica, and I had spent hours reviewing every piece of evidence, strategizing and preparing for the operation. Our tech team had pinpointed the warehouse as the linchpin of the network's activities, and now it was time to act. The morning was still early, and we needed to move quickly before the warehouse became too busy. The warehouse, a large, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. We had secured blueprints of the facility and identified several entry points. Our plan was to infiltrate the warehouse discreetly, gather as much information as possible, and, if necessary, apprehend key figures involved. As we assembled in the briefing room, Collins took the floor. Today's operation is crucial. We need to remain calm and focused. We've got a detailed plan, but we must be prepared for any unexpected developments. Jessica nodded, glancing at the operation map. We'll split into 2 teams. Team A will handle the entry and surveillance, while Team B will monitor and provide backup. Remember, our primary objective is to gather intelligence and ensure the safety of everyone involved. I reviewed the gear and equipment, surveillance cameras, listening devices, and a variety of tools for breaching the facility if needed. Everything had been meticulously checked and double-checked. "Any questions before we head out?" I asked, looking around the room. One of the junior agents, Dave, raised his hand. "What if we encounter resistance? How do we handle it?" Collins answered firmly, "If we face resistance, our priority is to de-escalate the situation if possible. Use non-lethal methods to neutralize any threats and fall back to safety if necessary. Our goal is to gather evidence and avoid unnecessary confrontation." With that, we gathered our gear and headed to the vehicles. The warehouse loomed in the distance as we approached, its industrial exterior betraying no hint of the secrets it might hold. The team was silent, but resolute, each step bringing us closer to uncovering the full extent of the Clown Network's operations. As we arrived at the warehouse, the reality of our mission set in. The stakes were high and the outcome uncertain. But with our plan in place and our resolve unwavering, we were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The warehouse loomed in the pre-dawn light, a shadowy silhouette against the pale sky. Our team approached with a mix of excitement and apprehension, fully equipped and ready for what lay ahead. The air was heavy with anticipation as we moved to our designated positions. Team A, led by Jessica and me, took up position near the main entrance of the warehouse. The large steel doors were secured with a basic lock, an initial barrier that we quickly dealt with using a bolt cutter. The clatter of metal against metal was muffled by our careful movements. With the lock removed, we gently eased the door open, the hinges creaking softly. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few flickering overhead bulbs. The vast space was filled with crates, barrels, and pallets stacked haphazardly. The scent of dust and stale air mixed with a faint but unsettling chemical odor. We advanced cautiously, each step deliberate as we scanned for any immediate threats or surveillance equipment. Our first objective was to find a vantage point where we could observe without being detected. We moved to a raised platform that overlooked the main floor. From here, we could see several workers moving about, seemingly engaged in routine tasks. The hum of machinery and the murmur of voices provided a backdrop to our observations. I set up a hidden camera while Jessica deployed listening devices. We needed to capture as much of the conversation and activity as possible. As we worked, Jessica whispered, "Keep an eye on the schedule board over there. It might give us some clues about their upcoming plans." The schedule board, a large whiteboard cluttered with notes and dates, was covered with cryptic markings and codes. It seemed like a key piece of the puzzle. I focused the camera on it, hoping to capture any relevant details. Suddenly, a commotion broke out. One of the workers shouted, and the other employees began to scatter. Jessica and I exchanged worried glances, instinctively reaching for our equipment. It seemed the warehouse was not as quiet as we had hoped. I peered through a gap between the crates, spotting a figure, someone who looked out of place, possibly a higher-up in the network, entering the scene. This could be an opportunity to gather crucial intel. We stayed hidden, watching intently as the figure began speaking with the workers, their conversation heated and urgent. The tension in the warehouse was palpable, and our mission was in full swing. We had to remain vigilant and focused, knowing that one wrong move could jeopardize the entire operation. Our next steps would be crucial in determining whether we would uncover the full extent of the network's activities or fall short of our goal. The warehouse's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the unexpected commotion continued. Jessica and I remained crouched behind the crates, trying to stay out of sight while maintaining our focus on the figure who had entered. He was tall, with a sharp suit that contrasted with the rough, industrial surroundings. His presence alone suggested he was someone important. The man's voice was low but urgent as he spoke to the workers. From our vantage point, we could only catch snippets of the conversation. "We need to expedite the shipment," he said, his tone demanding. "The delivery schedule has been moved up. I want everything ready by tonight." Jessica adjusted the listening device to get a clearer audio feed. "This could be critical," she whispered. "If they're rushing shipments, it means something big is about to happen." I nodded, trying to capture every detail on the camera. The workers seemed nervous, their earlier calm replaced by a palpable sense of urgency. They moved quickly, their actions hurried and disorganized. Something significant was unfolding. Suddenly, one of the workers noticed an anomaly in the schedule board. His face turned pale as he pointed out a discrepancy. The figure in the suit approached, his expression darkening. He grabbed a marker and made a few quick changes to the board, then snapped at the workers to continue their tasks without delay. Jessica leaned closer, whispering, "That's the moment we need. If the changes on the board are significant, they could reveal the nature of the shipment and the timing of their operations." We carefully reviewed the footage, zooming in on the schedule board. The changes were subtle but crucial. New dates and codes had been added, which might correspond to key operations or events. I quickly recorded these details, knowing they could be the key to connecting the dots in our investigation. Just then, the warehouse door creaked open again, and a new group of people entered, their presence adding to the growing sense of urgency. Jessica and I exchanged glances, realizing that our time was running short. We needed to gather as much information as possible before we had to retreat. We quickly finished our setup, ensuring the cameras and listening devices were in place to capture any further developments. With the critical data secured, we signaled to the rest of the team via our earpieces. It was time to prepare for our exit strategy. The next phase of our operation would be to analyze the collected evidence and determine our next steps. As we silently made our way out of the warehouse, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. We had gathered valuable intel, but the real challenge was yet to come, unraveling the full scope of the network's activities and bringing those responsible to justice. As we exited the warehouse and the first light of day began to filter through the surrounding trees, our team regrouped in the designated safe zone. The quiet that followed the frenetic activity inside was almost surreal. We gathered around a portable table where Collins and the rest of the team awaited our report. The weight of what we had just experienced was evident in their expressions. Jessica and I quickly briefed them on the situation. "We managed to set up surveillance in key areas," Jessica began. "We observed a significant level of urgency among the workers and noticed changes to the schedule board. The man in the suit appeared to be in charge, and he was clearly overseeing a critical operation." Collins nodded, his eyes focused on the images and audio files we had collected. "Good work. Let's see what we've got." I connected the camera feed to the portable monitor, and the team watched as the footage played back. The schedule board came into view, revealing the changes the figure in the suit had made. The codes and dates were now clear, but their exact implications remained elusive. Mia from the tech team started analyzing the data. "I'll cross-reference these new dates and codes with known activities and locations. We should be able to identify any patterns or upcoming events." As Mia worked, Jessica and I discussed our observations. "It's clear that something major is in the works," Jessica said. "The urgency and the changes to the schedule suggest they're preparing for a significant operation." Collins looked thoughtful. "We need to understand what this operation involves. The information from the warehouse might lead us to their next move, but we need to act quickly before they can alter their plans or cover their tracks." The team's focus shifted to extracting actionable intelligence from the data. Mia's analysis revealed several upcoming dates and locations that seemed suspiciously important. "These match with the patterns we've seen before," Mia said. "It looks like there's a coordinated event scheduled for later tonight. If we can investigate this further, we might be able to prevent it or at least gather more information on their network." With the new leads in hand, we prepared to deploy again. The urgency of the situation was clear. Every moment counted, and we had to be ready for whatever came next. As we made our way to our next location, I felt a surge of determination. The operation was far from over, but we were one step closer to unraveling the network's secrets and putting an end to their sinister plans. The air was crisp as we moved toward our next location, the details of the warehouse operation still fresh in our minds. The urgency of our mission had never felt more palpable. The information we had gathered pointed to an imminent event that could be a pivotal moment for dismantling the entire network. We arrived at a discreet location, a modest building on the outskirts of town that appeared unremarkable from the outside. According to our analysis, this was one of the spots mentioned in the schedule changes. The area was quiet, and the early morning sun cast long shadows over the surroundings. It was a stark contrast to the hectic activity of the warehouse. Jessica and I approached the building cautiously. We needed to ensure that our presence was undetected, as any hint of our investigation could jeopardize our mission. We communicated with the team through our earpieces, coordinating our movements and preparing for any possible encounters. Collins and the rest of the team took up positions around the perimeter, their eyes scanning for any signs of activity. Mia, working from the tech van, monitored the surveillance feeds and provided real-time updates. "I'm picking up some movement inside," she relayed through the earpiece. "It looks like there's a lot of preparation going on." Inside the building, we observed a scene similar to what we had seen at the warehouse. Hurried activity, people working with a sense of urgency, and the occasional glance at a large blueprint pinned on the wall. The blueprint detailed a complex setup, indicating a high level of planning and coordination. Jessica and I carefully moved closer to the blueprint, documenting its contents. "This could be the key to understanding their entire operation," Jessica whispered. "If we can decipher this, we might be able to predict their next moves." We took detailed photographs and made notes of the key elements. The blueprint appeared to outline several locations and times, suggesting multiple stages to their plan. As we worked, we heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Instinctively, we ducked behind a stack of crates, our breaths held. A small group of people entered the room, their conversation punctuated by an air of finality. "Everything needs to be in place by tonight," one of them said. "This is the biggest operation we've ever attempted." With the new information and the urgency of their remarks, it was clear that tonight's event was crucial. We had to gather as much intel as possible and prepare for whatever might come next. As we wrapped up our observations and made our way out, the sense of impending action grew stronger. The next few hours would determine the success of our mission, and we had to be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The tension was almost unbearable as we assembled in the command center, our minds racing with the implications of the information we had gathered. The building we had just surveyed held the final pieces of the puzzle. At least, that's what we hoped. The blueprint indicated a coordinated operation happening tonight, and our mission was to disrupt it and gather evidence to ensure a successful takedown of the network. Collins, Jessica, and I huddled around a large table covered in maps and documents. The room was filled with a low murmur of activity as the rest of the team prepped equipment and reviewed last-minute details. Mia was at her station, poring over the data we had collected, ready to provide real-time updates and analysis. "We have a solid understanding of their plans," Collins said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Tonight's operation is critical. We need to be precise and act quickly to prevent them from carrying out whatever they have in store." Jessica nodded, her expression focused. "We've mapped out the key locations from the blueprint. If we can position ourselves strategically, we might be able to intercept their actions and gather crucial evidence." Mia looked up from her monitor. "Based on the data, I've pinpointed a few critical times and places. We'll need to coordinate our movements to cover all the bases. I'll keep track of their communications and send alerts if anything changes." As we reviewed the final plans, a sense of urgency gripped me. The blueprint's details suggested that tonight's operation wasn't just another shipment or event, it was something much larger, potentially a culmination of the network's activities. The stakes were high, and our success depended on our ability to stay ahead of them. With everything in place, we prepared to head out. The team split into smaller units, each assigned a specific task based on the blueprint's information. Our goal was clear: disrupt the operation, gather evidence, and prevent any further activities from the network. As I double-checked my gear, a mixture of determination and apprehension filled me. We had come so far, and tonight was the moment we'd been working toward. Every detail mattered, and every second counted. The success of our mission hinged on our ability to act decisively and stay vigilant. We moved out into the cool night air, our steps synchronized and purposeful. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, a reminder of the world we were trying to protect. The night was young, and the operation was about to begin. The night was still and eerily quiet as we arrived at the first of our designated locations. The moon cast a faint glow over the city, illuminating the streets with an almost ghostly light. We parked a few blocks away, keeping a low profile to avoid drawing attention. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby park. Jessica and I moved stealthily toward the building, our footsteps muffled by the cool night air. We were equipped with night vision goggles and communication gear, ensuring we could remain in constant contact with the team while staying hidden. The blueprints had indicated this as a critical location, but we needed to confirm what was happening here before taking further action. Through the narrow gaps between buildings, we observed the area. The location seemed unusually quiet, but that didn't necessarily mean the operation wasn't underway. "Stay sharp," Jessica whispered, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We don't know if they've changed their plans." We approached the building's side entrance, where a small security panel was visible. Jessica worked quickly, using her lock-picking tools to bypass the electronic lock. The panel beeped softly as it was deactivated, and the door creaked open. Inside, we found ourselves in a dimly lit hallway, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of industrial cleaner. We moved cautiously, our movements deliberate and slow to avoid making any noise. A quick sweep of the area showed no immediate threats, but the quiet was unsettling. We reached a set of stairs leading down to a basement level, the vibrations of distant machinery faintly echoing through the concrete walls. Descending into the basement, we found ourselves in a large room filled with crates and equipment. The faint hum of machinery grew louder, and the room was lined with shelves stocked with various items. Jessica and I split up to cover more ground, searching for any evidence related to the operation. As I investigated a stack of crates, I found several documents and electronic devices that appeared to be connected to the network's activities. I quickly photographed the items and made notes, knowing that this could be crucial for piecing together their plans. Just then, my earpiece crackled to life. "We've spotted movement at the second location," Mia reported. "It looks like they're beginning their operation. Proceed with caution and be prepared to adjust your strategy." Our task was far from over. With new urgency, we prepared to leave and head to the next location. Every piece of evidence was critical, and the night's success hinged on our ability to stay one step ahead of the network's plans. The night grew darker as we navigated to our next location, a warehouse on the edge of town. The urgency in Mia's voice over the earpiece had heightened our alertness. The operation was clearly in full swing, and every second mattered. Our team was scattered across several key points, each tasked with monitoring and gathering information. Jessica and I approached the warehouse cautiously, our footsteps soft against the pavement. The building loomed before us, its silhouette stark against the night sky. Sparse lighting cast long shadows that danced on the walls, creating an ominous atmosphere. We used the shadows to our advantage, slipping through a side gate that led to the rear of the warehouse. The gate was unlocked, and we moved silently along the exterior, our senses heightened. We peered through a window and saw a scene similar to what we had encountered earlier. Workers hurriedly moving equipment and checking their schedules. The warehouse was abuzz with activity, and the sense of urgency was palpable. It was clear that this location was another crucial hub in the network's operation. Jessica and I took out our gear and began setting up surveillance equipment. We positioned miniature cameras and microphones to capture every detail. The key was to remain undetected while getting the most comprehensive view of their activities. As we worked, I noticed a group of individuals huddled near a set of crates, their conversation hushed but intense. "They're discussing something important," I whispered to Jessica. "Let's try to get closer." We edged nearer, careful to avoid making any noise. Through the narrow gap between the crates, we listened in. The conversation was about a shipment scheduled for the early morning, a large quantity of goods that were being prepared for dispatch. The mention of a specific time and place matched the details we had seen on the blueprint earlier. Just then, my earpiece crackled again. "We've got a situation," Collins's voice came through. "It looks like the main event is starting sooner than expected. We need to adjust our plans and move quickly." With the new information, Jessica and I quickly gathered our equipment and prepared to move out. The situation was escalating faster than anticipated, and our next steps would be critical. We had to get to the heart of the operation before it was too late. We exchanged a determined glance and slipped back into the night, ready for the final phase of our mission. Every moment counted, and the success of our operation depended on our ability to adapt and act swiftly. The sky was just beginning to lighten as we arrived at the third and final location, a nondescript office building nestled between a row of similar structures. The first hints of dawn painted the horizon in hues of orange and pink, casting a soft glow on the cityscape. We parked a few blocks away, taking advantage of the early hour to blend in with the minimal foot traffic. Jessica and I exchanged glances as we prepared to approach the building. The night had been long and fraught with tension, but our objective was clear. We needed to secure the final pieces of evidence and ensure the network's plans were thoroughly disrupted. As we neared the building, we noted the increased security, a single guard stationed at the entrance and cameras monitoring the exterior. It was evident that this location was of significant importance. Our approach had to be precise. We slipped into an alleyway adjacent to the building where Jessica began working on disabling the security system. Her fingers danced over the electronic lock, bypassing the security measures with practiced ease. The door clicked open, and we entered a dimly lit lobby. The building was eerily quiet, with the only sounds being the distant hum of air conditioning and our own footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. We followed the layout we had from the blueprint, making our way to the office where we suspected the final critical documents and communications would be stored. Reaching the office door, we carefully cracked it open and peered inside. The room was filled with filing cabinets and desks cluttered with papers and electronic devices. The sheer volume of material suggested a substantial operation was being managed from here. We split up to cover more ground. Jessica began rifling through the filing cabinets while I focused on the electronic devices. The clock was ticking, and we had to work quickly to gather as much evidence as possible before the network's operation moved to its final phase. As I examined a particularly intriguing set of files on a computer, my earpiece crackled with Mia's voice. "The main event is about to start. We've got less than an hour before things kick off. Be prepared to extract yourself quickly." The pressure was mounting, but we had to remain focused. The evidence we collected here could be the key to dismantling the entire network. We moved swiftly, ensuring we documented everything and secured crucial files. With our mission nearing its final phase, every action counted. We gathered our findings, rechecked our equipment, and prepared to exit. As we slipped back into the early morning light, the weight of our task settled in. The network's future, and potentially the safety of countless individuals, hinged on the success of our efforts tonight. As we emerged from the office building, the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the morning gloom. The city was stirring to life, oblivious to the high-stakes operation that had unfolded in its midst. Jessica and I navigated the quiet streets, our minds racing with the enormity of what we had just accomplished. With our evidence securely packed and ready for transport, we met up with the rest of the team at a predetermined rendezvous point, a secluded park not far from the office building. The park's tranquil setting was a stark contrast to the chaos of the night, but it provided the perfect cover for our final briefing. Collins was already waiting, his face etched with concern. "How did it go?" he asked as we approached. Jessica and I exchanged a look before I replied. "We got what we needed. The office had crucial documents and several electronic devices that tie the network's operations together. We should be able to piece together their entire scheme with this." Mia was already on her laptop, sifting through the data we had collected. "I'm analyzing the information now," she said. "Based on the documents, it looks like they were preparing for a major operation today. The timeline and logistics we've uncovered are critical. We need to act fast to prevent them from executing their plans." The urgency of the situation was palpable. Collins nodded, his expression resolute. "We'll get this evidence to the right authorities." The operation tonight may have been a success, but the real test will be ensuring that this network is dismantled for good. As we reviewed our findings, it became clear that the network's reach was broader than we had initially thought. The documents hinted at connections with various other groups and potential future operations. The information we had gathered was not just about one night's plans, but a significant part of a larger puzzle. With the evidence secured and the data in transit, our next step was to ensure that the authorities acted swiftly. We needed to make sure that the network's infrastructure was thoroughly investigated and dismantled. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, signaling the start of a new day, we took a moment to reflect on the night's events. The adrenaline was fading, but the weight of our mission remained. The success of our operation depended not only on what we had done, but on how effectively the information would be used to bring down the entire network. We parted ways with a shared sense of accomplishment and determination. The night had been long, but the dawn brought with it a new sense of hope. Our fight was far from over, but we had taken a significant step toward making the city a safer place. The aftermath of our operation was both a relief and a whirlwind of activity. The sun had fully risen by the time we made our way to the safe house where the team had been instructed to gather. It was a modest, nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, chosen specifically for its anonymity. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of exhaustion and anticipation. As we entered the safe house, I found the rest of the team already there, reviewing the materials we had collected. Jessica was on the phone with the authorities, ensuring that the evidence we had gathered was being processed properly. Mia was working on a detailed report, her eyes darting between multiple screens as she compiled the data. Collins looked up from the briefing materials he was reviewing. "Good work out there," he said, his tone both appreciative and professional. "But we can't let our guard down. The network may have been hit hard, but we need to stay vigilant. There's still a lot at stake." I nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. Despite the successful collection of evidence, the real test lay in the follow-through. The authorities had to act on the information swiftly to prevent any further damage. Jessica finished her call and joined us. "The authorities are mobilizing their resources. They're setting up raids on the key locations and tracing the network's connections. It's all in their hands now, but we'll need to keep close tabs on the situation." Mia looked up from her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's light. "The data we've provided is comprehensive. It details the network's operations, their financial transactions, and their connections with other groups. The authorities should be able to make a significant impact with this." As I glanced around the room, I could see the weariness in everyone's eyes. The night had been long, and the emotional toll was evident. Yet there was a shared sense of accomplishment that bound us together. We had faced danger head-on, and our collective efforts had made a difference. "Let's take a moment to rest and regroup," Collins suggested. "We've done everything we can for now. It's time to let the authorities take over and focus on the next steps." We settled into the safe house, each of us taking a moment to catch our breath and reflect on the night's events. The operation had been a success, but the fight was far from over. As the day wore on, we prepared ourselves for whatever came next, ready to continue our work in ensuring that justice would prevail. The safe house was quiet now, save for the low hum of equipment and the occasional murmur of conversation. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, creating a subdued ambience that contrasted sharply with the adrenaline-fueled chaos of the previous night. As I settled into a chair, trying to relax for the first time in hours, I couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation that still clung to me. Collins had gathered the team for a debriefing, and we all assembled in the small, nondescript conference room. He took a seat at the head of the table, his expression serious yet calm. "All right, let's go over what we've accomplished and what comes next," he began, addressing us with his usual authoritative tone. Jessica was the first to speak, providing a rundown of her conversations with the authorities. "The raids are scheduled to begin in the next few hours. We've handed over all the evidence, and they're already mobilizing their teams. The connections we uncovered are extensive, and they're taking this very seriously." Mia chimed in, her voice steady. "I've been working on the analysis of the data we collected. It's clear that the network was planning something major, possibly involving multiple fronts and several high-profile targets. The authorities have the information they need to disrupt their operations, but it will be a complex process. Collins nodded, looking at each of us in turn. Good work. The immediate threat has been addressed, but we need to think about the long-term implications. We've exposed a significant portion of their operation, but they might try to regroup or even retaliate. The weight of his words settled over us. The network was powerful and resourceful, and we had to remain vigilant. The evidence we had provided was just the beginning. Dismantling their entire infrastructure would require ongoing effort and coordination. As the meeting wrapped up, we each took a moment to reflect. I glanced at the clock and realized how much time had passed since our operation began. Fatigue was setting in, but there was also a sense of resolve. We had made a difference, but the fight was far from over. Collins stood and addressed us one last time. Let's take this time to rest and recharge. We've accomplished a lot, but we need to stay sharp. We'll reconvene in a few hours to discuss the latest updates and our next steps. We nodded, grateful for the chance to unwind. As I walked away from the meeting, I found a quiet corner to sit and gather my thoughts. The city outside was beginning to bustle with activity, a stark reminder of the normalcy we had temporarily disrupted. I knew that our work was far from done, but for now, it was time to take a breath and prepare for whatever came next. The afternoon passed in a haze of half-sleep and restless anticipation. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange hue over the city, the safe house became a hub of activity once more. The team had returned from their brief respite, and we were gearing up for the next phase of our operation. Collins had called an impromptu meeting to review the latest updates from the authorities. The room was filled with the low murmur of conversations as we gathered around the conference table. Jessica was back on the phone, providing updates and coordinating with field agents. Mia was cross-referencing data, her focus unwavering despite the exhaustion evident on her face. When Collins finally addressed us, his tone was brisk, but carried a note of cautious optimism. The raids have begun, preliminary reports are promising, several key locations have been hit, and we've managed to apprehend a number of individuals linked to the network. I listened intently, processing the information. Have we received any word on the extent of the damage to their operations? Are there any significant leads that we should be aware of? Jessica put down the phone and looked up. Yes, actually. The authorities found evidence of a backup operation in a different location. It seems they had contingency plans in place, but we've managed to disrupt their primary activities. They're now scrambling to regroup. Mia nodded, adding, the data we provided was crucial in pinpointing their major hubs. We've also got some promising leads on additional contacts within the network. It's clear that their reach is extensive, but we're making progress. Collins reviewed the information with a nod. This is a significant step forward, but we need to remain focused. The network may attempt to counterattack or adapt their strategies. We need to stay ahead of them. The sense of urgency was palpable. We had struck a major blow, but the fight wasn't over. The network's ability to adapt and respond meant that our efforts had to be relentless. As the evening wore on, we continued to analyze incoming reports and coordinate with the authorities. The weight of our mission was heavy, but the stakes were too high to allow complacency. Every piece of data, every update from the field was vital in dismantling the network's operations and ensuring that justice was served. By late evening, the room was a flurry of activity. I took a moment to step outside for a breath of fresh air. The city lights flickered against the twilight, a reminder of the normal world that continued to spin while we worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The battle was far from over, but our resolve was stronger than ever. As night fell over the city, a tense quiet settled in the safe house. The frantic pace of the earlier hours had given way to a more measured, albeit no less urgent rhythm. Collins had ordered a comprehensive review of the latest intelligence, and the team was fully immersed in assessing the aftermath of the raids. In the dim light of the conference room, Jessica was analyzing the newly gathered data. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she sifted through the latest reports and intercepted communications. We've got some interesting developments, she said, breaking the silence. It seems like the network is trying to consolidate their remaining resources. They're moving assets and coordinating new safe houses. Mia, who was poring over a map dotted with recent activity, looked up with a furrowed brow. That's not surprising. They'll try to adapt and regroup. But this gives us an opportunity. If we can pinpoint their new locations quickly, we can stay one step ahead. Collins nodded thoughtfully. Agreed. Our next steps will be crucial. We need to ensure that any remaining members of the network are apprehended before they can rebuild their operations. We also need to provide the authorities with real-time updates so they can act decisively. I watched as Collins and Mia began strategizing their next moves. The room buzzed with quiet intensity, each of us focused on the task at hand. The weight of responsibility was palpable. The dismantling of this network was more than just a mission. It was a matter of public safety and justice. As the hours ticked by, I found myself reflecting on the scope of our work. We had made significant progress, but the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. The network's ability to adapt and respond meant that our efforts needed to be relentless and precise. Collins looked up from the table, his expression resolute. We'll regroup in the morning and assess our progress. In the meantime, let's make sure we're ready for any further developments. The authorities will need our continued support, and we have to be prepared for any countermeasures. The team dispersed to handle their respective tasks, the sense of urgency never fully fading. I took a moment to step outside and breathe in the cool night air. The city lights glimmered below, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere inside the safe house. As I looked out over the city, I couldn't help but feel a mix of apprehension and determination. The operation was far from over, but we were closer than ever to achieving our goal. The early morning hours brought little relief from the relentless pressure. Inside the safe house, the team was already at work, fueled by coffee and adrenaline. The previous night's efforts had yielded a wealth of information, but the task of analyzing it and formulating our next moves was daunting. Collins had called a briefing to address the latest developments. We gathered in the conference room, the atmosphere charged with a sense of urgency. Collins stood at the front, his face illuminated by the glow of the projector screen, displaying a network of interconnected data points. "Here's where we stand," he began, pointing to the screen. "The network has attempted to decentralize and regroup. We've identified several new locations and potential leaders they're trying to protect. Our priority now is to disrupt these new plans and prevent any further consolidation." Jessica was already on top of the data, her eyes scanning the latest intel. "We've managed to track their communications to a few key locations. They're setting up new safe houses and shifting their operations. We need to target these new hubs before they can stabilize their network." Mia chimed in with a tactical analysis. "We've identified patterns in their movements. It seems they're trying to lay low and re-establish connections. If we can coordinate with the authorities and launch simultaneous strikes, we might catch them off guard." Collins nodded approvingly. "Good. I want us to prepare a coordinated operation targeting these new sites. We'll need precise timing and execution. The authorities are ready, but we need to ensure that we're providing them with the most accurate and up-to-date information." The team dispersed to finalize the plans. Jessica and Mia were deep into logistical details, while I focused on drafting a communication brief for the authorities. Every detail mattered, and we couldn't afford any mistakes. As I worked, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. This was more than a high-stakes operation. It was about dismantling a network that had caused significant harm. The pressure was immense, but the resolve within the team was unwavering. We were on the brink of a breakthrough, and our coordinated efforts were key to achieving it. By mid-morning, we were ready to execute our plan. The city's pulse quickened outside, a stark reminder of the normalcy we were fighting to protect. With everything in place, we prepared for the next phase, knowing that our actions in the coming hours could determine the success of the entire operation.